Hi everyone. I'm the narrator, and I'm here to guide you today. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before we get started, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Get comfortable and relax. I never wanted this house. The last thing I needed was a 100-year-old Victorian house in the middle of nowhere, even if it was free. But there I was, 3 months after Grandma Rose's funeral, moving boxes into her old house because my apartment rent had doubled, and I couldn't afford to stay in the city anymore. The first week went smoothly. I set up my home office in what used to be the living room and turned Grandma's old sewing room on the second floor into my bedroom. I started settling into a routine. Sure, the house creaked and groaned like any old building, but I got used to it. The quiet, rural setting actually helped me focus on my programming work. Then, little things started happening. It began with the kitchen window. One Tuesday morning in July, I came downstairs and found it wide open. I stood there for a full minute, coffee cup in hand, staring at the white curtains fluttering in the breeze. I distinctly remembered closing and locking that window the night before because I had seen a raccoon in the backyard. I checked the latch. It worked perfectly, and there were no signs of forced entry. I closed it again, double-checking to ensure it was secure. Then it happened with the back door. I had installed a new deadbolt during my first week in the house. There was no way I'd forgotten to lock it. But at 3 a.m., I heard the click of the door opening. My heart pounding, I ran downstairs. By the time I reached the first floor, the door was ajar by about 2 inches. Warm, heavy summer air seeped in, carrying the sound of crickets. There was no one there, just darkness and the eerie stillness of the night. I started keeping a journal of these incidents. Not because I believed in ghosts, I didn't, but because I needed to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. In 2 weeks, I had a list of 12 unexplained events. Kitchen window found open 3 times. Back door unlocked twice. Front door lock mysteriously undone once. Attic door, which I had closed, found open twice. Strange scratching noises coming from the attic, constant. Cold spots in the upstairs hallway 4 times. Objects moved, my coffee mug, laptop, keys, all on several occasions. The cold spots unsettled me the most. It was the height of summer, with temperatures reaching 95 degrees Fahrenheit most days. Yet walking past Grandma's old bedroom always felt like stepping into a freezer. The rest of the house was warm and sticky, even with the air conditioning running. I called an HVAC technician to check the system. He found nothing wrong, no unusual airflows, no duct leaks. He suggested it might be an insulation issue, but that didn't explain why it only happened in that specific spot. The attic scratching noises started about a month after I moved in. At first, I thought it was squirrels or raccoons. I set traps but caught nothing. I sealed every possible entry point I could find, but the sounds persisted. They always began at dusk. I woke up at dawn to a constant, slow scraping sound, like something being dragged across the wooden floor upstairs. I went up to investigate dozens of times. The attic was always empty, except for some old furniture covered with sheets and boxes filled with my grandmother's belongings that I hadn't yet sorted through. The scratching always stopped the moment I opened the attic door but started again as soon as I left. The scrape of my fork against the empty plate echoed in the kitchen at 2 a.m. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and my growling stomach wouldn't let me sleep. My wife, Sarah, was spending the weekend at her sister's, and I'd fallen back into my old bachelor habits, irregular meals and late nights glued to the TV. The house felt different at night. Familiar rooms took on strange shapes in the dim glow of the microwave clock and the faint street light filtering through the kitchen window. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor settling. I stood at the counter, making a sandwich with the last of the turkey from the fridge. Mayo, mustard, lettuce, tomato. I made it mechanically, my tired brain wandering. My bread knife scraped against the cutting board as I sliced the sandwich diagonally out of habit. Sarah always said sandwiches tasted better that way. That's when I heard it. The first step, a distinct creak coming from the staircase leading to the second floor. I froze, my sandwich halfway to my mouth. Another creak followed. Then another. Slow, deliberate footsteps descending the stairs. "Max?" I called out, assuming it was our golden retriever sneaking down for a midnight snack. Max always knew when someone was in the kitchen, no matter the time. But the steps kept coming. The fourth step from the top. The fifth. The sixth. Suddenly I felt a cold, wet nose press against my bare calf, and I jumped. Looking down, I saw Max sitting next to me, wagging his tail and staring intently at my sandwich. He had come in through the doggy door, which still swayed gently, letting in the crisp night air. The footsteps stopped halfway down the stairs. My heart pounded against my ribs. The sandwich slipped from my fingers and landed on the counter. Max's ears perked up, and his head turned toward the hallway leading to the stairs. A low growl rumbled in his throat. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. The silence stretched on, broken only by the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. 10 seconds. 20. 30. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and strange in the darkness. No response. Max's growl grew louder. The fur along his back stood on end. His body went rigid. I had never seen him act this way before. Normally, he was the friendliest dog imaginable, approaching strangers with boundless enthusiasm. I reached for my phone on the counter, silently cursing when I realized I'd left it charging upstairs in the bedroom. The landline was in the living room, across the hallway. The knife block, though, was only a meter away. Moving as quietly as I could, I stepped toward the knives. A floorboard creaked loudly beneath my foot, shattering the silence. I froze, listening. Nothing from the stairs. My fingers wrapped around the handle of the largest chef's knife, its weight reassuring in my hand. But truthfully, I had no idea what I would do with it if I came face to face with an intruder. "I'm armed," I announced, trying to make my voice sound strong and steady. "I've called the police. They're on their way." The lie hung in the air. Still, no response from the stairs. Max hadn't budged from his spot by the counter, his growl low and steady, his eyes locked on the hallway entrance. I reached out with my free hand and grabbed his collar, grounding myself in his solid presence. I had to look. I had to know what was out there. The hallway light switch was just inside the entrance, about 6 feet away. Those 6 feet might as well have been 6 miles. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, holding the knife out in front of me. Max moved with me, staying close to my leg. 4 steps to the switch. 3. 2. A floorboard creaked overhead, not from the stairs, but from the upstairs hallway. Whatever it was had moved off the stairs and was now walking above me. My fingers found the switch and flipped it up. Light flooded the hallway, harsh and sudden. I squinted against the brightness, my gaze locked on the empty staircase. The wooden steps stretched upward into the darkness beyond where the hallway light reached. The burgundy floral-patterned carpet that Sarah had insisted on installing was undisturbed, its design winding upward into the shadows. Max's growl shifted, becoming sharper, more urgent. He pulled against my grip on his collar, trying to retreat from the hallway. Another creak sounded from above, closer now, near the top of the stairs. I could hear it clearly, something moving across the floor of the guest bedroom. The one we'd planned to turn into a nursery before we found out Sarah couldn't have children. My phone was up there. So was the baseball bat I kept under the bed. But there was no way I was going up those stairs. Backing away slowly, I tugged Max with me. We reached the kitchen, and I fumbled behind me for the car keys I'd left on the counter. My fingers brushed them, but I knocked them onto the floor instead. The sound echoed through the house. The footsteps above stopped. I dropped quickly to grab the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pick them up. Max whined, pressing himself against my legs. We ran into the night, our breaths quick and shallow. The motion sensor light clicked on, flooding the backyard with a harsh white glare. We sprinted toward my car parked in the driveway. My hands fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before I finally managed to unlock the door. Max jumped into the passenger seat, and I threw myself behind the wheel, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I shifted into reverse, the tires screeching against the pavement as I sped out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller, fading into the darkness. All the windows were dark, except for the kitchen and hallway lights I had left on. Then, something moved behind one of the second-story windows. A shadow, there for a split second and gone so quickly I couldn't be sure I'd actually seen it. I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart was still pounding. Max, sitting in the passenger seat, had calmed down a bit, but his ears remained alert, twitching at every sound. After about 20 minutes, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart on the outskirts of town. The place was nearly deserted, with only a handful of cars scattered across the vast expanse of asphalt. Fluorescent lights cast everything in a sickly, pale glow. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old emergency phone, a basic model I kept fully charged for situations just like this. My hands had finally stopped trembling enough to dial Sarah's number. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice heavy with sleep. "Hello? Sarah," I blurted out, relief flooding me as I leaned back against the seat. "Thank God." "John?" she asked, confused. "What's going on? It's almost 3 a.m. I need you to come home. Now." "What? Why? What happened?" I struggled to find the words to explain what had just happened, how to make it sound real and not like the product of an overactive imagination or too many late-night horror movies. "There's someone in the house," I finally managed. "Or something. I don't know. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Max was with me the entire time." "Calm down," she interrupted. I could hear the rustle of sheets as she sat up. "Start from the beginning." So I told her everything, sticking to the facts, what I'd seen, what I'd heard. Even as I spoke, it sounded crazy to me. "Did you call the police?" she asked when I was done. "Not yet," I admitted. I needed to hear your voice first. To know you were okay." "Call them. Right now," she said firmly. "I'm getting dressed. I'll be home in an hour." "No, wait, don't come until morning, please." "Whatever's there." "John," she cut me off, her voice unyielding. "Call the police. Stay in the parking lot and wait for them. I'm on my way." She hung up before I could argue. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then finally dialed 911. The operator took my information calmly, promised to send officers to check the house, and asked if I wanted to meet them there. Against every instinct screaming at me to drive in the opposite direction, I said yes. 20 minutes later, I parked across the street from my house. 2 patrol cars were already there, their lights off. 4 officers stood on the front lawn, talking quietly. I got out of my car, leaving Max inside. One of the officers approached me, her badge reading. "Chun. Mr. Thompson?" she asked. I nodded. "We've completed a full sweep of the house. All the doors and the windows are closed. There are no signs of forced entry. We didn't find anyone." "Did you check the attic?" I asked. "We checked all the hidden spaces everywhere," the officer assured me. "The house is clear." I glanced at the dark windows of our house. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Chen replied. "We found a few windows open upstairs, probably the source of the noises you heard. The wind can do strange things in old houses." I wanted to argue, to tell him about the deliberate sound of those footsteps. But I knew how it would sound. "Thank you," I said instead. "Sorry for wasting your time." "It's not a waste," Chen replied. "Better safe than sorry. Do you want one of us to stay while you go back inside?" I shook my head. "No, I'll wait for my wife. She's on her way." The officers left, their patrol cars disappearing into the night. I sat in my car with Max, staring at the house. 45 minutes later, Sarah arrived, parking her car behind mine. She got out and walked up to my window, her face tight with concern. "The police didn't find anything," I told her before she could ask. "They said it was just the wind." She looked at the house, then back at me. "Let's go in together." I followed Sarah up the path to the front door, with Max walking between us. Sarah unlocked the door and switched on the lights. We walked through the house together, room by room, checking every closet, every corner. Everything was exactly as it should be. No signs of disturbance, no evidence of anything unusual. We ended up in the kitchen. My switch AIO was still on the counter where I'd left it. Sarah picked up the chef's knife I'd abandoned and returned it to the knife block. "Well," she said, attempting a smile, "at least you didn't burn the house down trying to make a midnight snack." I couldn't return her smile. "I know what I heard, Sarah." She placed a hand on my arm. "I believe you heard something. But look, nothing's missing. Nothing's broken. Maybe it was just the house settling, or—" She hesitated. I knew what she wasn't saying. "Maybe you imagined it. Maybe the stress, from work, from our failed attempts to have a child, from everything else, finally got to me." "Maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. That night, we went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to Sarah's steady breathing beside me, the occasional snuffle of Max from his bed in the corner, straining to hear footsteps that never came. The next day, I installed security cameras throughout the house, in the hallways, pointing at the stairs, covering every entrance and exit. Sarah didn't object, though I noticed her exchange worried glances with her sister when she came over to pick up some clothes she'd left behind. 3 weeks passed. The cameras recorded nothing unusual. No more footsteps in the night, no strange noises, everything was normal. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the house, I catch movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow passing just beyond my vision. And sometimes, late at night, I wake up to the sound of Max growling softly in his sleep. I lie there, listening to the creaks and groans of the house settling around us. And I think about those footsteps on the stairs. I think about what would have happened if I had gone up to investigate instead of running. I think about what might have been waiting in the darkness at the top of those stairs. The security cameras keep watching, their red lights blinking steadily in the night. Sarah says I should take them down, that they're no longer necessary, that what I heard that night was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But I leave them on because I know what I heard. And because sometimes, when I review the footage late at night while Sarah sleeps, I see something, just for a frame or two. Too quick to be sure. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. A movement that doesn't quite match the wind. A figure that's almost, but not quite, human. And I wait, knowing that sooner or later those footsteps will return. And next time, I'll have proof. But part of me hopes they never do, because deep down, I'm afraid of what the cameras might show. I'm afraid that some mysteries should remain unsolved. I'm afraid that knowing the truth might be worse than wondering. So, I keep the cameras running and avoid the stairs at night. And I pretend not to notice when Max stares into empty corners, his fur bristling, watching something I can't see. Every night before bed, I check all the doors and windows. Even though I know it won't make any difference, because whatever came down those stairs that night didn't need doors or windows. It was already inside. I wasn't going to write this, but I need to get it out of my head. Maybe someone will believe me. Maybe someone else has seen it too. I don't know what's real anymore and what isn't. But I know what I saw. And I know what Max saw too. Dogs don't lie. They don't imagine things. They simply react to what's there. It started 3 months ago. I'd been working extra shifts at the warehouse, trying to save up for a down payment on a house. 60-hour weeks, sometimes more. The overtime pay was good, but it was wearing me down. That's what I told myself when the dreams started. Just stress. Just my brain trying to process the exhaustion. The first time I saw it, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. The red numbers on my alarm clock burned that time into my memory. There was something standing at the foot of my bed. A dark figure about 6 feet tall. Completely black, not like a shadow, but like a hole in the air. I couldn't move. My throat closed up. I lay there, frozen, staring at it for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then I blinked, and it was gone. I turned on the lamp on my nightstand. The room looked normal. My dirty clothes were still piled in the corner. The door was still closed. Max, my German shepherd, was sleeping peacefully in his bed by the window. Nothing out of place. It was just a dream, I said out loud. My voice sounded strange in the quiet room. Just stress. I got up, drank some water, and went to the bathroom. And I went back to bed but left the light on. The next night, the same thing happened, 3:17 a.m. The figure was there again. This time, it was a little closer to the bed. I could see it better, or maybe, see, isn't the right word. It was as if my eyes couldn't focus on it, like trying to look at a black hole. If black holes could stand in your bedroom and watch you while you sleep. This went on for weeks. Always at 3:17 a.m. Always the same figure. And each time, it got closer. I started sleeping with all the lights on. I bought one night light, then another, until my bedroom looked like a Christmas display. But it didn't matter. The figure kept coming. I kept telling myself it wasn't real. I even went for a physical, thinking maybe something was wrong with my brain. The doctor found nothing. Normal blood pressure, normal blood sugar, no signs of neurological issues. He prescribed sleeping pills and told me to cut back on caffeine. The pills didn't help. In fact, they made it worse. When you're groggy from medication, it's even harder to convince yourself that you're just imagining things. Then Max started acting strange. It was a Tuesday night. I remember because I was watching that ridiculous show where people bake cakes that look like other things. I was nodding off on the couch when Max suddenly sat up, his ears perked forward, staring at the corner of the room. His fur bristled, and a low growl started in his throat. I looked toward where he was staring. There was nothing there. Just the corner where I keep my exercise equipment that I never use. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked. But he kept growling. I checked my phone, 3:17 a.m. My stomach sank. Max had never reacted to my dreams before. He always slept through them. But now he was growling at nothing, at the exact same time I usually saw the figure. I got up and turned on every light in the apartment. Max followed, sticking close to my legs, his growl never stopping. I checked every corner, every closet, behind every door. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was there. But Max wouldn't stop growling at that corner. The next day, I decided to try something. I usually went to bed around 11 p.m., but that night, I decided to stay up. Max and I sat on the couch, watching bad TV. At exactly 3:16 a.m., Max tensed up. His ears shot up, and he stared at the same corner. The growl started again, low, threatening. I checked my phone, 3:17 a.m. Then the figure appeared in the corner, right where Max was staring. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't in bed. I was fully awake, sitting on my couch, and my dog and I were looking at the same thing. Max's growl grew louder. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, darker than the darkness around it, as if someone had cut a human-shaped hole in reality itself. I couldn't move. My whole body felt cold. Max pressed against my leg, still growling, his body trembling. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. I wanted to scream, but my throat was frozen. We stayed there, Max and I, locked in place, staring at the figure. And there I was, staring at the figure for exactly 1 minute before it simply disappeared, vanishing as if someone had flipped a switch. Max, my dog, stopped growling, whimpered, and jumped onto the couch, clearly disturbed. I tried to stay awake, but it didn't matter. Every single night, At exactly 3:17 a.m., whether I was awake or asleep, the figure would appear. And every night, Max would see it too. I started documenting everything. I set up my phone to record the corner where the figure appeared. The video showed nothing, just an empty corner. But you could hear Max growling, reacting to something that wasn't visible on camera. One night, I decided to confront it. I stood directly in front of the corner at 3:17 a.m., waiting. Max was behind me, growling low and deep. Then, the figure appeared. I forced the words out of my throat. "What do you want?" No response. It just stood there, black as a void, unmoving, soundless. "Why are you here?" I asked again. Nothing. "Get out of my house!" I shouted. The figure didn't react. After a minute, it vanished, as always. I tried everything to escape it. I slept at friends' houses, but it didn't work. The figure found me, no matter where I was. At exactly 3:17 a.m., it would appear in whatever room I stayed in. My friends thought I was losing my mind. They couldn't see it, but they could see how Max reacted, growling at empty corners, trembling, and whining. "Maybe you should see someone," my best friend Tom suggested after I crashed on his couch for the third night in a row. "You know, a professional." So I did. The therapist listened to my story and prescribed anti-anxiety medication. I took it, but the figure still appeared. I moved to a new apartment. It didn't help. I even changed jobs, thinking maybe it was work-related stress. But the figure followed me. Then, last week, everything changed. I was sitting on my new couch in my new apartment, watching Max stare intently at the corner where the figure always appeared. At 3:17 a.m., the figure showed up. But this time it moved. It took a step toward us. Max's growl turned into a bark, a deep, terrified bark that I had never heard from him before. He backed up, pressing against my legs with such force that I almost fell. The figure took another step. I could see it more clearly now. It wasn't just a human shape anymore. It had features, or rather, voids where features should be. Darker patches in the blackness formed the semblance of eyes and a mouth. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. Max was barking furiously now, loud, panicked, desperate. The figure kept moving closer. Its motion wasn't natural. It didn't walk. It slid, as if someone were dragging a cutout of pure darkness across the room. I panicked. I grabbed my keys, leashed Max, and bolted out of the apartment. We spent the rest of the night in my car, parked in a Walmart lot. But I know it doesn't matter. It's 3:16 a.m. as I write this. Max is in the passenger seat, staring at me, then glancing at the rearview mirror, growling low in his throat. We're parked under a bright security light, but I know that won't help. I can see the figure forming in the back seat. It's 3:17 a.m. now. It's reaching for me. I should run. But what's the point? It will keep finding me. It will keep coming closer. It will keep reaching for me. And if you have a dog, watch its reaction. They see it too. They've always seen it. It's closer now. The darkness is spreading across the front seat. Max is losing his mind, barking and clawing at the window. I can feel it reaching out. Later, just remember, 3:17 a.m. They see it too. I should have never opened that dusty box in Marco's attic. 3 weeks later, I still wake up at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, with their voices echoing in my head. But I have to write this down. Maybe someone else will read this story and know better than to make the same mistake I did. It all started when Marco got that job in Singapore. He'd been my best friend since college, and suddenly, he had 2 weeks to pack up his entire life and move across the world. Of course, I offered to help him clean out his house. That's what friends do, right? The attic was the worst part. 20 years of accumulated stuff, crammed into a space barely tall enough to stand in. The August heat made it feel like an oven, and everything was coated in a thick layer of dust. I'd been up there for hours, sorting through old magazines and college textbooks, when I found the box. It was hidden behind a pile of moving boxes. Nothing remarkable at first glance, just a plain wooden box about the size of a pizza box. No labels, no markings. The wood felt smooth under my fingers, worn down by years of handling. When I opened it, I found a handmade game board along with 6 carved wooden pieces and 3 dice. The board depicted a spiral path leading to the center, like a darker version of Candyland. Each square on the path had symbols drawn on it, some I recognized, like moons and stars, but others were completely unfamiliar. The wooden pieces were small animal carvings: a rabbit, a fox, an owl, a deer, a wolf, and something that might have been a crow. Intrigued, I snapped a picture and sent it to Marco. "I found this in your attic. Looks handmade. Want me to save it for you?" Marco replied almost immediately, "I've never seen it before. Must have belonged to the previous owners. Toss it if you want." But I couldn't throw it away. The craftsmanship fascinated me. Every animal piece was intricately detailed, and the artwork on the board, though simple, had an almost magnetic quality. Instead of discarding it, I took it home. That weekend, I invited a few friends over for drinks and some board games. After a couple of rounds of Cards Against Humanity, I brought out the mysterious game. "Check this out," I said, placing it on the coffee table. I found it while cleaning out Marco's attic. Sarah picked up the fox piece, examining it carefully. "It's beautiful. But how do you play?" We found a folded piece of paper inside with the basic rules: roll the dice, move your piece along the spiral, and follow the instructions on the square you land on. The first player to reach the center wins. "Simple enough," Tom said, grabbing the wolf piece. "Better than another round of cards." Sarah chose the fox, Lisa took the owl, and I picked the rabbit. We rolled to see who would go first. The first few turns were uneventful. The squares had instructions like move back 2 spaces or roll again. But as we moved closer to the center, things started to get strange. Sarah landed on a square with a crescent moon and... Suddenly, he couldn't speak for 3 turns. Not because the rules said so, but because he physically couldn't. He typed on his phone that it felt like his throat was frozen. Tom landed on a square with a star and started shaking uncontrollably. Even though my apartment was warm, when Sarah moved her piece to a square with a twisted symbol I didn't recognize, everything in my apartment flickered. "Maybe we should stop," said Lisa when she could finally speak again. Her voice was rough. "Let's keep going, we're almost done," Tom replied, although his hands were trembling as he rolled the dice. That was when the lights went out completely. In the darkness, I heard something that sounded like whispers coming from the board. I grabbed my phone to light up the room, but the board looked different. The spiral path seemed to move, twisting like something alive. "Nope, it's over," I said, slamming the box shut. No one argued. That night, I had the first dream. I was walking through a dark forest, but the trees weren't made of wood. They were made of the same soft material as the box. The path beneath my feet spiraled, and there were voices, so many voices, all calling my name. "David," they whispered. "David, you have to listen. The game isn't over." A figure emerged from behind one of the trees. It seemed human, but not quite. It was too tall, too thin, with fingers that were too long. Its face was hidden in shadows. "You must never finish the game, David," it said. "No matter what, no matter who asks, never reach the center." I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:33 in the morning. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare caused by too much beer and a weird game. But when I walked into the living room, the box was on the coffee table, even though I'd left it on a shelf. I shoved it to the back of the closet and went to work. That afternoon, when I came back, it was on the table again. Sarah called around noon. Did you have strange dreams last night too? My stomach sank. I was in a forest, and there were things that looked like people but weren't. They followed me, calling my name. And they told me not to finish the game. There was silence on the other end. We need to talk, she said. We met at a cafe downtown. Tom and Lisa were already there. None of us had slept well. We all had the same dream. It's just a game, Tom said, but his voice shook. Just a weird coincidence. Then why does it keep showing up on my table every time I try to put it away? I asked. Lisa wrapped her hands around her cup as if she were searching for warmth. I tried to take a picture of it this morning to show my sister. The picture didn't save. It just showed an error message. We should destroy it, said Sarah. How? Asked Tom. Burn it. I shook my head. Yesterday, I tried to cut it. The knife didn't even leave a mark. That night, I had the dream again. This time, the figure showed me something, a vision of what would happen if someone finished the game. I woke up screaming. The next week was a whirlwind of sleepless nights. My desperate attempts to get rid of the game were endless. I threw it into a trash bin, but it appeared in my bathtub. I buried it in the park, only to find it under my bed. I even drove 2 hours to a cliff and threw it into the ocean. But when I returned to my apartment, it was in my kitchen, dry as if it had never touched the water. The dreams worsened. More figures joined the first, their voices overlapping as they showed me more visions of what was at stake. I saw cities collapsing, reality tearing apart like wet paper, things crawling through the cracks from somewhere beyond. They showed me the center of the spiral, what was waiting there, desperate to be released. The game wants to be finished, one of the figures said. It's hungry to complete itself, but it must never be allowed. My friends weren't much better off. Lisa moved in with her sister after she started seeing shadows moving in her apartment. Tom quit his job because he couldn't stop hearing whispers at his desk. Sarah stopped sleeping altogether, surviving only on coffee and energy drinks. We tried to investigate the origins of the game. I went back to Marco's old house, now occupied by a young couple, and asked about the previous owners. It was a dead end. I spent hours online searching for similar games or symbols like the ones on the board, but found nothing. Finally, I called Marco in Singapore. Are you sure you never saw this game before? I asked. You never heard anything about it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He finally spoke, saying, I didn't want to say anything because I thought I was crazy. The night before I found that job offer, I had a dream about a game. In the dream, someone told me I had to leave, that I needed to get away from that house. The next morning, the job offer for Singapore appeared in my inbox. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? I was right. 2 weeks after we first played, Tom disappeared. He just vanished from his apartment, leaving his phone, wallet, and keys behind. The only thing missing was his car. The police found it 3 days later, parked in a rest area 2 states away, with no trace of Tom. The night he disappeared, I had a different dream. I saw Tom in the woods, but he wasn't alone. Figures surrounded him, their fingers too long, reaching for each other. He was holding the game box. I can finish it, he said. I can end this for all of us. You mustn't do it, the figures screamed in unison. Then everything went black. Sarah was the next to break. She appeared in my apartment at midnight, her eyes wide, holding the wolf piece. I figured it out, she said, pushing past me to enter the living room. We have to finish it. It's the only way to make it stop. Sarah, I didn't take her arm. Have you seen what they showed us? Do you know what happens if someone wins? And what if they're lying? She pulled away from me. What if finishing the game fixes everything? What if it makes everything go back to normal? You can't believe that. She started crying. I can't keep doing this, David. I can't keep following these dreams. I can't keep seeing them everywhere. I just wanted to stop. I held her as she cried. And she finally fell asleep on my sofa. When I woke up in the morning, she was gone too. I found the game in the park where we used to have lunch together. The board was set up on a picnic table, with all the pieces organized at the start. The wolf piece was already several spaces ahead. "Sarah, please," I said, slowly approaching her. "Remember what they showed us. Remember what's coming if someone reaches the center. Maybe that's what must happen." Her voice was eerily calm. "Maybe this world needs to end. Maybe that's why the game exists." I jumped toward the board, but something invisible stopped me. I could only watch as she rolled the dice over and over, moving the wolf piece closer to the center. The sky began to darken, the air grew heavy. I heard those whispers again, but this time they didn't come from the board. They came from everywhere, the trees, the grass, the very earth itself. Sarah was 2 spaces away from the center when Lisa appeared, running across the park. She lunged at Sarah, knocking her off the table just as she was about to roll the dice. The board flew into the air, the pieces scattering across the grass. The whispers turned into screams. The darkness closed in around us. For a moment, I saw something emerging through a tear in the air above the table. Something with too many arms, too many eyes, and too many mouths. Then, Lisa threw something, Tom's car keys, which she had found that morning in his mailbox. They hit the board just as that thing was crossing over, and everything exploded in a flash of light. When my vision cleared, the board had disappeared. The pieces, the dice, everything, even the box I had left in my apartment, was gone. Sarah was unconscious but breathing. When she woke up in the hospital the next day, she didn't remember anything. After our first night of the game, Tom showed up at his sister's house in Colorado a week later, with no memory of how he had gotten there. Lisa's shadows faded. The dream stopped. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers. Sometimes I see movement in the corner of my eye. At times, I catch glimpses of tall figures with fingers too long. And sometimes I wonder if the game really disappeared or if it's still out there, waiting for someone else to find it in some dusty attic or forgotten closet. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had finished the game. What was really waiting at the center of that spiral? Were the figures trying to protect us or themselves? And what if Sarah was right? What if this world needs to end? I don't know. I don't want to know. All I know is that if you ever find a plain wooden box with no labels, containing a hand-drawn spiral board and carved pieces shaped like animals, don't open it. Don't play it. Don't even touch it, because the game wants to be finished. And maybe somewhere, someone will finish it. I just pray I'm not here when they do. My phone's clock read 3:17 a.m. when the portrait moved. I know because I checked the time right after waking up suddenly, my heart pounding against my ribs. The old woman in the black dress was staring directly at me from her golden frame, her head tilted at an angle that didn't exist. When I went to bed, I had chosen room 412 at the Blackwood Hotel specifically for its historic charm. The receptionist had mentioned it was one of their heritage rooms, preserved to look exactly like it did in 1922, when the hotel first opened. The dark wood furniture, the brass fixtures, and the vintage photographs that adorned the walls had always drawn my interest due to their history, but now, lying on the old four-poster bed with beads of sweat forming on my forehead, that charm felt more like a trap. I noticed something strange in the portrait as I unpacked that same night. The woman seemed to be around 60 years old, dressed in a high-necked black dress typical of the Victorian era. Her gray hair was tightly pulled back, and her thin lips formed a stern line. But it was her eyes that truly caught my attention, dark brown and unusually intense. As I moved around the room, those eyes seemed to follow me. I told myself it was just a common optical illusion. Portraits often appear to follow viewers with their eyes. It's all about perspective and how the artist painted them. I'd experienced the same effect many times in museums. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was different, more deliberate, more aware. At first, I tried to ignore it. I hung my clothes in the old wardrobe, arranged my toiletries in the bathroom, and replied to a few work emails on my laptop. But every time I looked up, those eyes were fixed on me. I even conducted an experiment, slowly walking back and forth across the room while staring at the portrait. The woman's gaze perfectly tracked my movement. The muscles in my neck tightened. I approached the portrait to examine it, fighting the urge to look away from that piercing stare. The small brass plaque beneath the frame read, Margaret Blackwood, 1849 to 1922, the original owner of the hotel. I assumed her face had been painted with remarkable detail. I could see individual strands of gray hair escaping from her severe bun and fine crow's feet at the corners of her eyes. The artist had captured an unsettling intensity in her expression, as if she were silently judging anyone who dared to enter her domain. I raised my hand to adjust the frame, which was hanging slightly crooked. The moment my fingers touched the metal, a sharp, cold sensation ran through my hand. I jerked back, stumbling away from the wall. The cold lingered in my fingertips for several minutes. After that, despite my unease, the exhaustion from a long day of travel finally took over. I prepared to sleep, deliberately keeping my back turned to the portrait as I changed into my pajamas. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable for its age, and the sheets felt cool and fresh. I turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the city filtering through the heavy curtains. The noise woke me first, a soft scraping sound, like metal dragging across plaster. Then came the creak of old wood under tension. My eyes snapped open, but I didn't move, didn't even breathe. In the dim light, I could see that the portrait had shifted. The frame was now tilted at a sharp angle, and Margaret Blackwood's face was completely turned toward my bed. Her eyes gleamed with an impossible brightness in the dark. I remained frozen, my muscles stiff with fear. My throat felt too tight to scream. The only sound was the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears, and the soft tick-tack of the old clock on the shelf. The portrait hadn't just slid, it had rotated on the wall. The lower edge still firmly pressed against the plaster, while the top tilted at an angle that defied gravity. A car passed on the street outside, its headlights sweeping across the room in that brief illumination. I swear I saw the lips of Margaret Blackwood curl into an impossible smile. My body finally responded to the frantic signals from my brain. I lunged out of bed, stumbling as my feet got tangled in the sheets. I hit the wall, struggling to find the light switch. A warm light flooded the room, and I spun around to face the portrait. It was hanging perfectly straight, exactly as it had been when I first arrived. I stood there, gasping, the rug scraping against my bare feet. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I forced myself to walk closer to the portrait, fighting against every instinct that screamed at me to run. Margaret Blackwood stared ahead, her expression as stern and unchanging as oil paintings should be. I touched the frame again, ignoring the cold bite of the metal. It was securely mounted to the wall with heavy hooks. There was no way it could have moved on its own. I was just having a nightmare, I told myself, stress and an unfamiliar bed playing tricks on my mind. The night clock read 3:22 a.m. I had an important meeting at 9 and desperately needed sleep, but the thought of turning off the lights again made my stomach twist. Packing my things and heading to reception would make me look like a crazy person, complaining about a portrait that moved during the night. And if all the other rooms were booked, it was peak tourist season after all. Then a sound, like nails scraping against wood, made me spin around sharply. Nothing had changed, but the portrait seemed more imposing than before, drawing my eyes against my will. Margaret Blackwood's gaze pierced me with a tangible weight. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. That settled it. I grabbed my phone and wallet, slipped on my shoes, and flung the door open. I'd sleep in the lobby if I had to. The hallway was empty, lit by dim wall sconces casting more shadows than light. The red carpet muffled my footsteps as I hurried toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard the soft click of a door closing. But when I looked back, the door to room 412 hadn't moved. The elevator chimed. I almost launched myself inside. My finger pressed the lobby button repeatedly until the doors finally closed. Just as they shut, I saw something dark moving down the hallway. I pressed myself against the back wall of the elevator, my heart racing. The lobby was empty except for a young man behind the reception desk, scrolling through his phone with a bored expression. He looked up as I approached, observing my disheveled appearance with raised eyebrows. "Is everything okay, sir?" he asked. I opened my mouth to explain but then paused. How could I describe what I'd experienced without sounding crazy? I ran my hands over my face, buying time to think. "I'm having some issues with my room," I finally said. "Room 412. Is there any chance I could switch to a different one?" The receptionist's expression changed subtly. "Is there a specific problem with the room?" he asked. "The portrait. The one of Margaret Blackwood." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Has any other guest ever complained about it?" He was silent for a long moment, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. "The portrait of Mrs. Blackwood is a valuable piece of the hotel's history," he said carefully. "Some guests have mentioned feeling uncomfortable with it, but I assure you, there's nothing to worry about." "It moved," I exclaimed. I saw it move, and its eyes were following me. "Yes, that's a common observation. It's just the style of the painting, sir. A trick of perspective." No, you don't understand. It moved physically, off the wall." I was shaking. He raised a hand to stop me. "Sir, I apologize, but we're fully booked tonight. I can't move you to another room. If you'd like, I can have maintenance check the portrait's mounting tomorrow morning to ensure it's secure." My shoulders slumped. I could see from his expression that insisting wouldn't get me anywhere. "It's fine. Thank you anyway," I said. I turned toward the elevator, but then stopped. The idea of going back there made my skin crawl. "Is it okay if I sit here for a while?" I asked. "I'm having trouble sleeping." "Of course, sir. Would you like some coffee?" I nodded gratefully and sank into one of the comfortable chairs in the lobby. The receptionist brought me a decent cup of coffee, and I spent the next hour trying to convince myself that I'd imagined everything. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret Blackwood's face turning toward my bed, her painted lips curving into that impossible smile. Around 4:30 a.m., exhaustion finally overcame my fear. I couldn't spend the rest of the night in the lobby. I had to at least grab my laptop and some clothes for tomorrow's meeting. Maybe I could find another hotel with available rooms. The elevator ride back felt longer than before. The hallway was silent and empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My hands were shaking as I inserted the key card into the door of room 412. Everything seemed normal inside. The portrait hung straight on the wall, Margaret Blackwood's eyes fixed forward. I grabbed my laptop bag and started packing clothes into my suitcase, keeping my back to the painting. A floorboard creaked behind me. I froze, clutching a handful of shirts to my chest. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath fogging in the air. Slowly, very slowly, I turned around. The portrait had disappeared. Only an empty frame hung on the wall, the canvas completely blank except for a dark background. Before I could process what I was seeing, a movement caught my attention. A figure stood in the corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows. She was wearing a high-necked black dress. Her gray hair was pulled back tightly, and her skin had the color of old paper. Her eyes, those terrible and aware eyes, were staring at me with a predator-like focus. Margaret Blackwood took a step forward, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. I ran, not remembering dropping my clothes or opening the door. One moment, I was staring at the horror in the corner, and the next, I was racing down the hallway toward the stairs. I couldn't wait for the elevator. I couldn't risk getting trapped in that small space. Behind me, I heard the click of shoes on the carpet, moving at a slow, deliberate pace. I hit the stairs, the stairwell door, and took 3 steps at a time, my feet barely touching each landing before leaping to the next. I burst into the lobby, speeding past, startling the receptionist so much that he dropped his phone. I didn't stop to explain. I ran straight toward the front doors, into the pre-dawn darkness, not slowing down until I was 2 blocks away. Finally I stopped, gasping for air, with a sharp pain in my side. That's when I realized I had left everything behind: my suitcase, my laptop, my wallet, even my shoes. All I had was my phone and the clothes I'd slept in. I called my boss and made up a story about food poisoning to explain my absence from the meeting. Then, I found a 24-hour diner and sat there, drinking coffee until my hands stopped shaking. When the sun rose, I called a colleague and borrowed enough money for a taxi to the airport. I bought a ticket for the next flight home, not caring about the cost. Later that day, I called the hotel to have my things sent to me. The receptionist who answered didn't seem surprised by my request. He assured me that everything would be sent to my home address. A week later, a package arrived containing my suitcase and laptop. Everything was there, except my wallet, which they claimed they never found. I didn't care. I'd cancelled all my cards. Inside the side pocket of my suitcase, I found a small piece of paper I didn't recognize. It looked old, the edges yellowed and crumbling. Written in faded ink was a single sentence: "Thank you for visiting the Blackwood Hotel. We hope you join us again soon." The handwriting was elaborate and feminine, the kind taught in Victorian schools. Beneath the message was a signature: Margaret Blackwood. I burned the note and blocked the hotel's number on my phone. Sometimes, at night, I still dream of those eyes watching me from the darkness. And sometimes, when I pass by mirrors or framed pictures, I catch myself checking to make sure nothing has moved inside them. I've never stayed at another historic hotel. Modern chains may lack character, but at least their walls are empty of watchful eyes. And if I ever find myself in that city again, I'll sleep in my car before setting foot in the Blackwood Hotel. The worst part isn't the nightmares or the lingering fear of the portraits. It's knowing that somewhere in room 412, the painting of Margaret Blackwood still hangs on the wall, waiting for the next guest to appreciate her story. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she ever really went back to Marco. I shouldn't have agreed to take care of Mike's house. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit in my car outside his house. The engine is running, my hands are shaking on the steering wheel, my throat sore from all the shouting, and my shirt is drenched in sweat. I need to tell someone what happened there, even if they don't believe me. The portrait hadn't just slipped, it had rotated on the wall. The bottom edge was firmly pressed against the plaster, while the top tilted at an angle that defied gravity. A car passed outside on the street, its headlights sweeping across the room in that brief flash of light. I swear I saw Margaret Blackwood's lips curl into an impossible smile. My body finally responded to the frantic signals from my brain. I launched myself out of bed, stumbling as my feet got tangled in the sheets. I hit the wall, searching for the light switch. A warm light flooded the room, and I turned to face the portrait. It hung perfectly straight, exactly as it had when I first arrived. I stood there, gasping. The carpet felt rough against my bare feet. Sweat had soaked through my shirt, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I forced myself to walk closer to the portrait, fighting against every instinct that screamed at me to run. Margaret Blackwood was staring ahead, her expression as stern and unyielding as it should be in oil paintings. I touched the frame again, ignoring the cold bite of the metal. It was solidly mounted on the wall with heavy hooks. There was no way it could have moved by itself. It was just a nightmare, I told myself. Stress, an unfamiliar bed, playing tricks on my mind. The bedside clock read 3:22 a.m. I had an important meeting at 9, and I desperately needed to sleep. But the thought of turning the lights off again made my stomach twist. I walked through the room, running my hands through my sweat-soaked hair, trying to think rationally. I could ask for a different room, but I'd have to pack all my things and go to the reception. It would make me look like a crazy person complaining about a portrait moving in the night, and what if all the other rooms were booked? After all, it was tourist season. A sound like nails scraping against wood made me spin around abruptly. Nothing had changed, but the portrait seemed to loom larger than before, pulling my eyes against my will. Margaret Blackwood's gaze pierced me with a tangible weight. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. That settled it. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, slipped on my shoes, and yanked the door open. I would sleep in the lobby if I had to. The hallway was empty, lit by dim wall sconces that cast more shadows than light. The red carpet muffled my footsteps as I hurried toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard the soft click of the door closing. But when I looked back, the door to room 412 hadn't moved. The elevator chimed. I nearly lunged inside, my finger repeatedly pressing the lobby button until the doors finally closed. Just as the doors were closing, I saw something dark moving down the hallway. I pressed myself against the back wall of the elevator, heart racing. The lobby was empty except for a young man behind the reception desk, scrolling through his phone with a bored expression. He looked up when I approached, studying my disheveled appearance with raised eyebrows. "Is everything okay, sir?" he asked. I opened my mouth to explain, then paused. How could I describe what I had experienced without sounding insane? I ran my hands over my face, buying myself some time to think. I'm having some issues with my room," I finally said. "Room 412. Is there any chance I could switch to a different one?" The receptionist's expression subtly shifted. "Is there a specific problem with the room?" "The portrait of Margaret Blackwood." I forced myself to look him in the eye. "Has any other guest ever complained about it?" He was silent for a long moment, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "The portrait of Mrs. Blackwood is a valuable piece of hotel history," he said carefully. "Some guests have mentioned feeling uneasy about it, but I assure you there's nothing to worry about." "It moved," I exclaimed. "Yes, that's a common observation. It's just the style of the painting, sir. A perspective trick." "No, you don't understand," I insisted. "It moved physically on the wall." I froze, raising my hand to stop him. "Sir, I apologize, but we are fully booked tonight. I can't move you to another room. If you'd like, I can have maintenance check the portrait's mounting in the morning to make sure it's secure." My shoulders slumped. I could tell by his expression that continuing to insist wouldn't get me anywhere. "All right, thanks anyway," I said. I turned towards the elevator, then stopped. The thought of going back there made my skin crawl. "Is it okay if I sit here for a while?" I asked. "I'm having trouble sleeping." "Of course, sir. Would you like some coffee?" I nodded gratefully and sank into one of the comfortable chairs in the lobby. The receptionist brought me a decent cup of coffee, and I spent the next hour sipping it, trying to convince myself I had imagined everything. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret Blackwood's face, turning toward my bed, her painted lips curving into that impossible smile. Around 4:30 in the morning, exhaustion finally overcame the fear. I couldn't spend the rest of the night in the lobby. I had to at least grab my laptop and change into something for the meeting tomorrow. Maybe I could find a different hotel with available rooms. The elevator ride back felt longer than before. The hallway was silent and empty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My hands trembled as I inserted the access card into the door of room 412. Everything seemed normal inside. The portrait hung straight on the wall, Margaret Blackwood's eyes staring ahead. I grabbed my laptop bag and began stuffing clothes into my suitcase, keeping my back to the painting. A floorboard creaked behind me. I froze, a handful of tightly packed shirts pressed against my chest. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath fogging in the air. Slowly, very slowly, I turned around. The portrait had vanished. Only an empty frame hung on the wall, the canvas completely blank except for a dark background. Before I could process what I was seeing, something caught my attention. A figure stood in the corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows. She wore a high-necked black dress, her gray hair severely pulled back, her skin the color of old paper. And her eyes, those terrible, knowing eyes, locked onto mine with the focus of a predator. Margaret Blackwood stepped forward. Her movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet pulled by strings. I ran. I don't remember dropping my clothes or opening the door. One moment, I was staring at the horror in the corner, and the next, I was racing down the hallway toward the stairs. I couldn't wait for the elevator. I couldn't risk getting stuck in that small space. Behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps on the carpet, moving slowly, deliberately. I hit the stairs, the door to the stairwell, and took the steps 3 at a time, my feet barely touching each landing before launching myself to the next. I burst into the lobby, startling the receptionist so badly that he dropped his phone. I didn't stop. I didn't explain anything. I ran straight for the front doors, into the pre-dawn darkness, and didn't slow down until I was 2 blocks away. When I finally stopped, gasping for air with a sharp pain in my side, I realized I had left everything behind: my suitcase, laptop, wallet, even my shoes. I had nothing except my phone and the clothes I had been sleeping in. I called my boss and invented a story about food poisoning to explain my absence from the meeting. Then I found a 24-hour diner and sat there, drinking coffee until my hands stopped shaking. When the sun came up, I called a colleague and borrowed enough money for a taxi to the airport. I bought a ticket for the next flight home, not caring about the cost. Later that day, I called the hotel to have my belongings sent to me. The receptionist who answered didn't seem surprised by my request. He assured me that everything would be sent to my home address. A week later, a package arrived containing my suitcase and laptop. Everything was there, except for my wallet, which they claimed they never found. I didn't care. I had already cancelled all my cards. Stuck in the side pocket of my suitcase was a small piece of paper I didn't recognize. It looked old, the edges yellow and crumbling. It was written in faded ink. There was a single sentence: "Thank you for visiting the Blackwood Hotel. We hope you join us again soon." The handwriting was elaborate, but it was the last thing I expected to see. I should never have agreed to look after Mike's house. That's what I keep telling myself, sitting in my car outside his house, engine running, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. My throat is raw from all the screaming, and my shirt is soaked with sweat. I need to tell someone what happened there, even if they don't believe me. I should never have agreed to take care of Mike's house. That's what I keep telling myself, sitting in my car outside his house, engine running, my hands shaking on the wheel. My throat feels sore from all the screaming, and my shirt is drenched in sweat. I need to tell someone what happened, even if they don't believe me. It all started 3 days ago. Mike asked me to look after his house while he visited his sister in Portland for the week. It seemed simple enough: water the plants, pick up the mail, make sure no one broke in or stole anything. I've known Mike since college, and his house is only 15 minutes away from mine in the suburbs. Easy money, I thought. The first 2 days were fine, even boring. I'd stop by his house in the morning before work and again in the evening, check the doors, adjust the thermostat, water his ridiculous collection of succulents. Everything was normal until tonight. I arrived around 7 p.m. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across Mike's perfectly manicured lawn. I used the spare key to enter through the front door, turned on the lights, and headed straight to the kitchen to grab a beer from the six-pack Mike told me I could help myself to. That's when I heard it. The sharp crackle of static from the living room, followed by an explosion of white noise so loud it made me jump and spill beer on my way. The TV had turned on by itself. Not just turned on, blaring at full volume, filling the house with the sound of electronic music. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I walked toward the living room, expecting to see that I had accidentally pressed the remote or something, but the remote was still sitting on the coffee table, untouched. The screen was flashing with black and white static, pulsing as if it were alive. I grabbed the remote and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time. The static continued to scream through the speakers. Fine, I thought. I'll just unplug it. I walked behind the entertainment center and I yanked the power cable directly from the wall, but the television kept running. My hand froze on the unplugged cable as I stared at the screen, still flickering with static. This can't be possible, I told myself, but there it was, working at full volume, with no issue at all. I pressed the physical power button on the side of the TV. Nothing. I ran my hands along the back of the unit, looking for backup batteries or some other power source. But there was nothing, just the plugged-in cable hanging uselessly against the wall. The static began to change its tone, lowering and transforming, almost turning into a growl. The hairs on my arms stood up. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees all at once. I backed away from the TV, my heart pounding in my chest. It was then that the static began to form shapes. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no, it was real. I could see distinct patterns emerging in the electronic snow. Dark patches that came together, almost forming a face. 2 black holes where eyes should be, an open mouth. It stayed there for just a second before dissolving back into random noise. But I saw it. I know I did. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I had to call Mike, tell him something was wrong with his TV. But when I tried to dial, all I got was static through the speaker, the same static that was still echoing from the living room. The screen on my phone flickered and shut off completely. The overhead light began to flicker too, pulsing in rhythm with the static, on, off, like a strobe light at a rave. In the flashes, I saw my shadow on the kitchen wall, but it didn't move like I did. Even though I was standing completely still, my shadow twisted and jerked, like it was a recording glitch. I rushed to the front door. The doorknob was cold to the touch and wouldn't turn. I threw my entire body against it, but it felt like trying to move a concrete wall. The windows were the same, completely immovable, despite being unlocked. The static from the TV grew louder, filling my head until I could barely think straight. The lights went out completely, leaving only the ghostly glow of the television screen. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized the static wasn't just coming from the TV anymore, it was everywhere. It seeped out of the electrical outlets, crawling along the walls like living frost, filling the air with crackling energy that made my skin crawl. I heard footsteps above me, slow, heavy steps that couldn't possibly belong to anyone who should have been in the house. They moved across the ceiling, heading toward the stairs. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breathing. The steps reached the top of the stairs. The static changed again, forming words this time, not spoken words, but as if they were being carved directly into my brain through my ears. "Join us," it repeated over and over, the words pulsing in time with my quickening heartbeat. "Become the signal." The temperature dropped even further. I could see my breath now, tiny clouds of vapor that seemed to be absorbed into the TV screen. The footsteps began to descend the stairs, slow and deliberate. Through the flickering light of the TV, I caught glimpses of a tall, impossibly thin figure, its head moving from side to side like a broken video feed. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a glass vase from the entryway table. The figure reached the bottom of the stairs. In the strobe-like TV light, I saw its face, or rather, the absence of a face. Where features should have been, there was only static, shifting and swirling like a tiny version of the screen's display. It approached me, its hands made a visual noise, fingers elongated and twitching. Shaking like broken antennas, I threw the vase with all my strength. It passed straight through the figure and shattered against the wall. The head of the static creature turned toward the sound, giving me an opening. I ran toward the kitchen. The drawers were now vibrating in their tracks, the silverware inside tinkling like wind chimes in a storm. All the electronic devices in the kitchen came to life: the microwave, the coffee maker, the digital clock on the stove, each spreading static. The refrigerator door opened by itself, spilling cold air along with the same eerie, electronic sound. I could feel it approaching from behind me. The air crackled with electricity, making my hair stand on end. My skin tingled as if I were about to be struck by lightning. I lunged for the back door, hoping it was closed like the front one, but it opened. I almost fell face first onto the porch. The static followed me outside, spilling from the house like smoke. The motion sensor lights on the backyard exploded in a shower of sparks. I ran across the grass, not daring to look back. The grass crunched beneath my feet, frozen despite the summer heat. When I reached my car, the electronic key fob didn't work. I had to manually unlock the door with the physical key, my hands trembling so much that I could barely insert it into the lock. When I finally opened the door, I glanced back at the house. Every window was glowing with the same static, pulsing like a heartbeat. And in every window, there were faces, dozens of them, all made of changing electronic snow, all staring directly at me. The static figure stood at the entrance, its body now stretching impossibly high, its head brushing the top of the doorframe. I threw myself into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition. The car roared to life. The electronics inside the car went crazy. The dashboard lights flickered, the radio changed stations at light speed, and the wipers slammed back and forth. But the engine started. I slammed on the brake and floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching on the pavement as I sped away from the curb. I saw something in the rearview mirror that made my blood run cold. The static figures were emerging from the house, now flowing across the lawn like living TV snow. They moved jerkily, like missing frames from a video, and they followed me in my car. I ran 3 stop signs, leaving Mike's neighborhood. The static creatures kept up, flowing down sidewalks and across front yards. Every streetlight I passed exploded in a shower of sparks. Car alarms began to go off in my wake. After about a mile, they began to fall behind, dissolving into the darkness like bad reception. Now I'm sitting here in my car, in an empty parking lot, trying to make sense of what just happened. My phone is working again, but I can't call Mike yet. What would I say? Sorry, man, your TV is possessed by static monsters, and your house is trying to turn people into living TV snow? The dashboard clock says it's just after midnight. The parking lot is empty except for my car, but I keep seeing movement in my peripheral vision, quick flashes of static that disappear when I turn to look. The streetlight above me is flickering, and I swear the pattern looks deliberate, as if it's trying to form words. I need to go home, but I'm scared to start the car again, scared that the static will come back stronger this time, scared that it's already inside the car's electrical system, waiting to drag me into the signal world from where those things came. I'm scared that if I look in the rearview mirror again, I'll see a face made of electronic snow staring at me from the back seat. But what scares me the most is the part of me that wants to go back. There's something pulling me, like a magnet attracting iron filings, a voice in the static promising to show me what's on the other side of that electronic snow. All I have to do is look at it, tune in, let go, become the signal. My car's radio just turned on by itself. I need to drive now, somewhere without electricity, without screens, without signals of any kind, maybe the mountains. I'll call Mike when I'm far enough away. I'll try to explain, but right now, I need to put as much distance as possible between me and that house, between me and the static. Because even now, I can hear it calling me, whispering through every electronic device around me. Join us, become the signal. Join us, become the signal, and may God help me, it's starting to make sense. The plate slipped from my hands and fell into the sink. My fingers froze under the running water. Something was wrong with my kitchen window. A red light was reflecting off the glass, coming from somewhere behind me. I hadn't turned on any red lights. I lived alone. I grabbed the edge of the sink, my wet hands leaving dark marks on the stainless steel. The glow wasn't bright, just a dull crimson stain on the surface of the glass, like a brake light reflected in fog, but it was there, floating on the glass, suspended behind my shoulder. I turned around. Nothing. Just my dark kitchen except for the light above the sink. The microwave clock read 11:42 p.m. The house was silent except for the water still running. When I looked back at the window, the red glow remained in the reflection, floating in the air about 2 feet from the ground, roughly where my head would be if someone were standing behind me. My mouth went dry. I reached and turned on the kitchen lights. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed to life, flooding the room with hard white light. The red glow on the window dimmed, but it didn't disappear. There must be something outside, I muttered, pressing my hands against the glass, staring into the night. My backyard was completely dark. No red light, no brake light, nothing that could be causing the reflection, just darkness pressing against the window. The water was still running. I turned it off, and the sudden silence felt heavy. My heart pounded against my ribs. The red glow stayed exactly where it was, floating in the reflection of the window about 60 centimeters behind me. I moved away from the sink, and the glow moved with me, maintaining its position in the reflection. My hands started trembling. "Hello?" I called, but there was no answer, only the silent hum of the refrigerator. I walked toward the kitchen doorway, watching the reflection the whole time. The red glow followed me, always keeping the same distance behind my head. When I reached the doorway, I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. My sweaty fingers slipped across the screen as I turned on the flashlight and swept it around the kitchen. Empty. No source for the red light. The beam passed exactly where the glow seemed to appear in the reflection, illuminating only air. My chest tightened. I needed to think logically. Maybe it was some strange optical illusion, maybe. There was something wrong with my eyes. I blinked hard several times and rubbed my face. The glow remained. I returned to the sink, forcing myself to move slowly. The dishes lay forgotten in the soapy water. I reached out and touched the window glass. It was cold under my fingertips. In the reflection, the red glow floated firmly about an inch to the right of my shoulder. Something made me want to look closer. The color wasn't uniform, it seemed to pulse slightly, like a heartbeat. As I stared, I noticed small dark red specks swirling inside, like blood cells under a microscope. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. A drop of sweat rolled down my spine. I needed to get out of the kitchen. I backed away from the sink, keeping my eyes on the window. When I reached the doorway, I turned and I quickly walked down the hallway toward the living room, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The living room had a large window that overlooked the front garden. As soon as I entered the room, I saw it, the red glow. It was reflected in that window, floating behind me, just like in the kitchen. I whispered, my voice cracking. "This isn't happening." I spun around in a circle with my arms outstretched, trying to catch whatever it was that was causing this. Nothing. Just empty air. But in every window and on every reflective surface, that red glow followed me like a twisted halo. I grabbed the keys to my car from the coffee table. Maybe if I drove somewhere, anywhere, I could figure this out, think clearly, get help. The front door stuck slightly as I opened it with a force. The fresh night air hit my face. I practically ran to my car, fumbling with the keys. The motion sensor light in my garage turned on, casting harsh shadows across the driveway. Reaching for the door handle of the car, I saw my reflection in the window. The red glow was there, now bigger, maybe the size of a basketball, and it had moved closer to my head, almost touching my reflected shoulder. I dropped the keys, the sound of them clinking on the concrete as I bent down to pick them up. Something froze me halfway. In the reflection of the car window, I could see the red glow stretching, reaching toward my hunched form like a smoky tentacle. I straightened up, dizzy. My heart pounded in my chest. I needed to call someone, the police. What would I tell them? That my reflection had a supernatural red light following it? My phone was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hands shaking so much that I could barely hold it. The screen was black and reflective. The red glow stared back at me from its surface. I threw the phone away from me. It rolled across the driveway and came to rest under my car. The motion sensor light turned off, plunging the driveway into darkness, except for the distant yellow glow of a street lamp. My breath came in short gasps. I leaned against the car, trying to control myself. This couldn't be real. It couldn't. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Go away," I whispered. "Please go away." I opened my eyes. The car window reflection showed the street lamp's light and the red glow. Now, it was definitely bigger. Definitely closer to my head. I ran down the driveway to the sidewalk, past dark houses with dark windows. My feet pounded the concrete. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the cool night air. At the corner, I stopped. Turning to the other side of the street, something caught my eye. Even at this distance, I could see my reflection, and the red glow, now the size of a beach ball, pressing against the back of my head like a giant blood droplet. I screamed. The sound reverberated off the buildings, startling in the quiet night. A dog began barking somewhere nearby. My legs gave way. I sat down hard on the sidewalk, putting my head between my knees. My whole body was shaking. I think, I said aloud. I think. What's changed today? What have I done differently? I went to work as usual. I came home, made dinner, started washing the dishes. Nothing unusual. The dishes were in the sink when I saw it for the first time. Maybe I stood up, trembling, and began walking back toward my house. Every window I passed showed the same thing, my reflection and that huge red glow floating behind me. I kept my eyes straight ahead, trying to ignore them. When I reached my front door, I hesitated. The brass doorknob reflected a distorted image of my face. The red glow had grown so much that it filled the entire curved surface, pulsing with its light. I grabbed the doorknob. I turned it before they could change their mind. The door creaked open, and inside the house, everything was exactly as I had left it. Lights still on in the kitchen, the sink half filled with dishes, the keys still scattered on the driveway where I had left them. I walked toward the sink, my shoes squeaking slightly on the linoleum. The reflection in the window revealed the red glow surrounding my head entirely, as if I were submerged in blood, moving slowly. I reached the sink. The water had cooled. I found the plate I had been washing when all of this began, a plain white dish with bits of dried food still stuck to it. Something caught my attention, a small mark on the surface of the plate, barely visible beneath the food remnants. I lifted it to the light. There, etched into the ceramic, was a symbol I had never seen before. It looked like a spiral, surrounded by strange angular marks. As I stared at it, the marks seemed to move, causing my eyes to ache. The plate slipped from my fingers, and this time, when it hit the sink, it shattered. Fragments of white ceramic scattered across the stainless steel. In the reflection of the window, the red glow pulsed once violently. I felt something cold touch the back of my neck. I spun around abruptly. The kitchen was empty, but I could feel it now, a cold pressure against my skin, exactly where the glow had touched my reflection. My legs carried me backward until I slammed into the counter. The pressure continued to spread across my shoulders like frozen fingers. The ceiling lights flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I felt the light of the dark. I heard something, a whisper so faint that I almost missed it, words in a language I didn't understand. The light stabilized. The pressure grew, pushing down on my shoulders. I grabbed the edge of the counter with such force that my knuckles turned white. The whispers came again, louder now. They seemed to be coming from inside my own head. The words slithered through my mind like snakes, leaving icy trails in their wake. My vision blurred. The red glow in the reflection of the window had grown so bright that it hurt to look at it. It surrounded my reflected form entirely now, pulsing with the same rhythm. The cold spread down my arms. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They wanted something. They wanted me to understand something. With the last of my strength, I turned my head to look at the broken plate in the sink. The symbol covered my face, catching the light, glowing wet. As I watched, the strange marks began to move, slowly spiraling around the center of the symbol. The whispers reached a feverish climax. The cold spread throughout my body. Now, in the reflection of the window, I saw the red glow start to seep into my skin, staining it crimson. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The whispers filled my head, drowning everything else. I understood them now. They were telling me what they needed, what they wanted me to do. My hand moved without my control, reaching for one of the broken plate fragments. The edge gleamed sharp and white. The last thing I saw in the window's reflection was my pale, haggard face as the red glow poured into my eyes like liquid fire. Then, the lights went out, and the whispers told me exactly what to do next. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. They found me unconscious in my kitchen, surrounded by broken plates and covered in strange cuts. The doctors couldn't explain the geometric patterns etched into my skin, nor could they understand why the wounds faintly glowed red under ultraviolet light. I told them I couldn't remember anything. It was easier than trying to explain. But sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers again. When I look into mirrors or windows, I see a faint red glow floating just behind my shoulder, waiting. They are still here, still watching, still hungry. And sometimes, when I'm alone, my hands move by themselves, reaching for sharp objects, drawing patterns I don't understand but somehow know by heart. The whispers tell me it won't be much longer now. Soon, there will be more of us. Soon, everyone will see the red glow in their reflections. I try not to look in mirrors anymore. I try not to see what I'm becoming, but the red glow is always there, waiting in every reflection. And the whispers never stop. They never stop. I shouldn't have checked the doorbell camera that morning. Some things just can't be unseen. Some things change everything you thought you knew about your quiet suburban life. It all started on a Tuesday in October. I was drinking coffee, scrolling through my phone before heading to work. The Ring app showed multiple motion alerts from the night before, all between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m. I almost deleted them without looking, almost. The first clip started off normally enough. The infrared camera showed my empty front porch in black and white. The wind moved the hanging plant near the door. 15 seconds of nothing. The Ring app was about to swipe to the next clip when something moved at the edge of the frame. A figure entered the shot. Tall, wearing dark clothes, walking slowly across my porch, footsteps completely silent on the wooden boards. Their head was down, their face hidden by what appeared to be a hood. My coffee went cold in my hand as I watched the figure approach the end of the porch and simply stand there. It didn't move. It did nothing. It just stood there, perfectly still, for almost a minute. Then its head turned slowly, mechanically, until it was staring directly at the camera. I dropped my phone. The face, God, the face, it was pale, almost glowing in the infrared light, but somehow wrong. The proportions were off, the eyes too large, too dark, the mouth stretched too wide. I picked up my phone with trembling hands, forcing myself to look at the screen, to keep watching the figure. It held that stare for 30 more seconds before it turned and walked out of the frame. The next clip started immediately after. Now, it was on the other side of the porch, inspecting my window, pressing its face against the glass, testing the lock. My stomach churned as I remembered I was sleeping just on the other side of that wall. 4 more clips followed the same pattern. The figure appeared, walked around, sometimes stared at the camera, sometimes studied the windows and doors, always moving with that unnatural slowness, always in complete silence. The final clip showed it standing directly in front of my door, face inches from the camera, just staring, simply staring for a full 3 minutes. Then, it tilted its head slightly and walked into the darkness. I called into work and reported sick. I spent the morning checking and reinforcing every lock, every window. I installed additional security lights and called the locksmith to put in better deadbolts. The entire time, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, all the lights on, a baseball bat across my lap, watching my phone, jumping at every notification. Nothing happened. The porch remained empty. Around 4 a.m., exhaustion finally took over, and I passed out on the couch. The next morning, I checked the recordings right away. My heart stopped. Between 3 a.m. and... At 3:15 a.m., I received 6 new motion alerts. Same figure, same slow and silent walk, same strange face staring at my camera. But this time, they tried the door lock repeatedly for almost 5 minutes. I called the police and showed them the recordings. They filed a report and said they would increase patrols in the area. They suggested I stay somewhere else for a few nights, but I could tell they weren't taking it seriously. They saw a simple intruder, but they hadn't seen those eyes. I didn't leave. I couldn't leave. Maybe it was my stupid male pride or just my stubbornness, refusing to face reality. I installed more cameras, bought motion sensors for every entrance, and set up a baby monitor by my bed so I could hear any sounds coming from outside. On the 3rd night, they came again, at the same time. But now, they spent a full 15 minutes at my door, turning the knob, pressing against the wood. Their face never more than inches away from the camera. I watched it unfold live on my phone, frozen in my bed. The door handle of my bedroom door vibrated, the wood creaked, but the locks held. By the 4th night, I was ready. I set up in the living room with a bat, a knife, and my phone. I called a friend to come over. Mike was a big guy, ex-military. He brought his gun. We stayed awake, watching the porch through the window. 3 a.m. came and went, and nothing happened. At 3:05 a.m., the motion sensor light in the backyard flickered. I turned, but the backyard was empty. On the security monitor at 3:10 a.m., I heard a light tap on the kitchen window, so faint, I almost missed it. The camera showed nothing. At 3:14 a.m., movement on the front porch. I gripped the bat tighter, slowly turning. They were standing at my window, their face pressed against the glass, staring directly at me, not at the cameras, but at me. I raised the bat and shouted for them to leave. There was no response. Their lips moved. No sound came out, but I could read the words. "Let me in." I stumbled backward. They pressed harder against the glass. The window creaked. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." Their mouths stretched wider with each silent word. Their eyes grew bigger, darker. The window cracked. I ran through the kitchen, out the back door, crossing the yard behind me. The glass shattered. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life. As I reversed, the headlights swept across my empty porch. I drove to the police station, showed them my car and the recordings from that night. They showed static on every camera from 3 a.m. to 3:15 a.m., even those inside the house. They found the broken window, filed more reports, dusted for prints, but found nothing. I sold the house the next month and moved to the other side of the country. I changed my phone number, deleted the Ring app, but sometimes, around 3 a.m., I still check my new security cameras. I keep watching for movement on my porch. I still see that face in my dreams, pressed against my window, whispering those words over and over. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, I swear I see flashes of a tall figure in dark clothing, standing motionless in my yard, walking with unnatural slowness, its head always turned, staring directly at the camera. The notifications came this morning, 6 motion alerts between 3 o'clock and... It's 3:15 in the morning, and I haven't checked them yet. I still don't know if I will. Some things can't be heard, some things follow you, some things just wait, patient and persistent, until you finally break down and let them in. They're waiting on my porch now. I can feel it, and soon, very soon, I'll have to decide whether to watch those clips, whether to look into those eyes again, whether to listen to the new words that whisper through my window. Time is running out. The sun is setting. The 3 a.m.s are coming for all of us eventually. Should I check those notifications? I shouldn't check those notifications. I have to check those notifications. My finger hovers over the app. The screen shines in the darkness. My hands won't stop shaking. My hands won't stop shaking. The phone screen glows brightly in the dark of my car, reflecting my pale, distressed face. I feel a mix of fear and determination. I can't keep living with this constant terror. I must face whatever is haunting me. I decide it's time to check those notifications. My finger hesitates for a moment over the touchscreen before finally sliding toward the app. When I open it, I see 6 motion alerts that were triggered between 3 o'clock and 3:15 in the morning. Each one shows a dark figure slowly moving across my porch, exactly like the previous nights. Taking a deep breath, I play the first clip. The figure appears again, tall and dressed in dark clothing, silently walking across the porch. Its face is hidden by a hood, but this time, I notice that its steps seem to be heading toward my main window. My eyes lock on the screen, feeling that same sense of being watched wrap around me. I decide to record my reaction as I play the clips, hoping to document any evidence that might explain what's happening. As I record, the figure in the video starts to stop in front of the window, slowly lifting its face toward the camera. Though I can't make out its features clearly, its eyes seem to glow with an unnatural intensity, reflecting the static that has terrified me so much. Suddenly, the phone buzzes loudly, and the screen flickers. The car's lights start to flicker, alternating between on and off. The engine sputters, and a cold rush of air floods the vehicle, even though the windows are closed. I feel a chill run down my spine as the static envelopes everything around me. I try restarting the phone, but the screen keeps displaying the endless notifications. The figures in the clips seem to multiply, appearing in every alert with increasingly aggressive movements toward my house. The whispers in my mind echo over and over. Join us, become the signal. I decide I can't sit here anymore. I cautiously get out of the car, feeling the cold seep into my bones. I walk toward my house. The night's shadows stretch and twist, merging with the static that seems to emanate from every corner. The security lights flicker weakly, unable to fully illuminate the path. As I approach the front door, I notice the windows are distorted, as if fogged by a red mist. Every time I pass a window, I see my reflection, accompanied by that crimson glow moving uncontrollably behind me. My steps slow as the front door seems to resist opening, held shut by an invisible force. With a mix of fear and determination, the door suddenly swings open with a squeak that echoes through the house, revealing a dark, silent interior. The lights flicker on automatically but fail to shake the feeling of being watched. The air inside is heavy, charged with the static that fills every room. I decide to head to the living room, where the previously possessed TV still shows remnants of static. I grab the remote and turn off the TV once and for all. The silence that follows is overwhelming. But suddenly, the lights flicker again and I hear footsteps behind me. I quickly turn around, but there's no one there. However, I can feel a palpable presence, as if something is trying to push me back. The walls seem to close in, and the air grows denser with each breath, making it harder to breathe. My eyes slowly adjust to the darkness, revealing dancing shadows that seem to move with a mind of their own. At that moment, a figure emerges from the shadows. It's Margaret Blackwood. Her face, now fully visible, shows eyes that exude a cold, calculating malice. Her smile is no longer impossible, but rather a sinister, satisfied grimace. "You've come," she whispers, her voice resonating in my mind. "Now it's your turn to join us." I try to step back, but my legs feel heavy, as if they are fused to the ground. Margaret steps forward, and the static around her begins to swirl, forming patterns that resemble invisible chains. "You can't escape," she continues. "Everyone who enters here becomes part of our signal, trapped in eternity by static." Desperate, I look for something to defend myself with, but everything around me seems to fade away, leaving only the emptiness of the darkness. The whispers fill my head, blending with the oppressive presence of Margaret. "Join us," she commands. "Become part of the signal." I feel the static begin to infiltrate my skin, every fiber of my being consumed by the dark energy. My vision blurs, and all I can do is resist, holding on to the last spark of what I have. Just when I feel everything is lost, a flash of light cuts through the darkness. It's my phone, now glowing brightly in my hand. With the last bit of strength I have left, I point the flashlight at Margaret and press the record button. "I won't let you," I say, feeling the static begin to retreat in the light. Margaret steps back, her figure slowly fading into the darkness. The whispers fall silent, and the air lightens. Though the house still feels heavy with unease, I fall to my knees, exhausted but alive. My hands tremble as I look at the screen of my phone, showing the figure of Margaret being disintegrated by the light. I know this isn't over, but for now, I've won a small victory. Taking a deep breath, I rise and walk towards the front door. I know I need to leave this house as soon as possible, but a part of me knows that something else is waiting in the shadows, watching, waiting for its moment to strike again. As I close the door behind me, I hear one last whisper, soft but clear. "This is just the beginning. I shouldn't have agreed to take care of Mike's house." That's what I keep telling myself as I sit in my car outside his house, engine running, hands shaking on the wheel. My throat is sore from screaming, and my shirt is soaked with sweat. I need to tell someone what happened there, even if no one believes me. It all started a few days ago. Mike asked me to watch his house while he visited his sister in Portland for a week. It seemed simple enough: water the plants, collect the mail, make sure no one broke in. The usual. I've known Mike since college, and his house is just 15 minutes from mine in the suburbs. Easy money, I thought. The first 2 days were fine, even boring. I would swing by in the mornings before work, and again in the evenings. I'd check the doors, adjust the thermostat, water his stupid collection of succulents, everything normal, until tonight. I arrived around 7 p.m. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over Mike's perfectly manicured lawn. I used my spare key to enter through the front door, turn on the lights, and I went straight to the kitchen to grab a beer from the 6-pack that Mike said I could help myself to. That's when I heard it, the sharp crackle of static coming from the living room, followed by an explosion of white noise so loud it made me jump, spilling beer all over my shirt. The TV had turned on by itself. Not just turned on, but at maximum volume, filling the house with the sound of electronic music. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I walked toward the living room, expecting to find that I had accidentally pressed the remote or something like that, but the remote was still sitting on the coffee table, untouched. The screen flickered with black and white static, pulsing as if it were alive. I grabbed the remote and hit the power button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time, but the static kept blasting through the speakers. Okay, I thought. I'll just unplug it. I walked behind the entertainment center and yanked the power cord straight from the wall. The TV kept running. My hand froze over the unplugged cable as I stared at the screen, still dancing with static. That's not possible, I told myself, but there it was, working at full volume with no issue. I pressed the physical power button on the side of the TV. Still nothing. I ran my hands over the back of the set, searching for backup batteries or another power source. There was nothing, just the unplugged cable hanging uselessly against the wall. Then, the static started to change tone, lowering and almost becoming a growl. The hair on my arm stood up. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees all at once. I stepped back from the TV, my heart pounding hard against my ribs. That's when the static began to form shapes. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no, there were definitely patterns emerging in the electronic snow. Dark spots were merging into something that almost looked like a face. 2 black holes for eyes, a gaping mouth. It was there for just a second before dissolving back into random noise, but I saw it. I know I saw it. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I had to call Mike, tell him something was wrong with his TV, but when I tried to dial, all I got was static through the speaker, the same static that kept blasting from the living room. The screen of my phone flickered and went dark. The overhead light started flickering too, pulsing in time with the static, on, off, like a strobe light at a late-night party. In the flashes, I saw my shadow on the kitchen wall, except it wasn't moving like I was. Even though I was standing completely still. I rushed to the front door. The doorknob was cold to the touch and wouldn't turn. I threw my whole body against it, but it was like trying to move a concrete wall. The windows were the same, completely immovable, even though they were unlocked. The static from the TV grew louder, filling my head until I could barely think. The lights went out completely, leaving only the eerie glow from the TV. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized the static wasn't just coming from the TV anymore, it was everywhere. It was seeping out of the electrical outlets, crawling up the walls like living frost, filling the air with crackling energy that made my skin tingle. Then I heard footsteps upstairs, slow steps. And the heavy footsteps, which didn't belong to anyone who was supposed to be in this house, moved across the ceiling, heading toward the stairs. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, and the static shifted again, forming words. This time, they weren't spoken, more like they were being carved directly into my brain through my ears. "Join us," it said over and over again, the words pulsing in time with my racing heartbeat. "Become one," the message echoed. The temperature dropped even more. I could now see my breath, small clouds of vapor that seemed to be sucked into the TV screen. The footsteps began to descend the stairs, slow and deliberate. Through the flickering light of the TV, I saw flashes of a tall, incredibly thin figure, its head moving from side to side like a poor video transmission. I grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, a heavy glass vase from the entry table. The figure reached the bottom of the stairs, and in the strobe light of the TV, I saw its face, or rather, the absence of a face. Where there should have been features, there was only static, twisting and turning like a miniature version of the TV screen. It moved toward me, Its hands made a visual noise, its fingers elongated and twitching like broken antennas. I threw the vase with all my strength. It passed straight through the figure and shattered against the wall. The creature's static head turned toward the sound, giving me an opening. I ran toward the kitchen. The drawers were now vibrating in their tracks, the silverware inside clattering like chimes in a storm. All the electronic devices in the kitchen powered on, the microwave, the coffee maker, the digital clock on the stove, each one releasing a wave of static. The refrigerator door opened on its own, cold air spilling out, along with that same ghostly electronic noise. I could feel it approaching behind me. The air crackled with electricity, making my hair stand on end. My skin tingled as though I were about to be struck by lightning. I threw myself toward the back door, hoping it was shut like the front one, but it opened. I almost fell face first onto the porch. The static followed me outside, spilling out of the house like smoke. The motion sensor lights in the backyard exploded in a shower of sparks. I ran across the lawn, too afraid to look back. The grass crunched beneath my feet, frozen despite the summer heat. When I reached my car, the electronic key fob didn't work. I had to unlock the door manually with the physical key, my hands trembling so much I could barely insert it into the lock. As I threw open the door, I glanced back at the house. Every window glowed with the same static, pulsing like a heartbeat. And in each window, there were faces, dozens of them, all made of shifting electric snow, all staring directly at me. The static figure stood at the entrance, its body now stretching impossibly tall, its head brushing against the top of the doorframe. I threw myself into the driver's seat. I inserted the key into the ignition, the car was in motion, the car's electronics went wild, the dashboard lights flickering, the radio changing stations at the speed of light, the windshield wipers swinging back and forth, but the engine started. I slammed the brake and floored the accelerator, the tires screeching against the pavement as I pulled away from the curb. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Static figures were coming out of the house, now flowing across the lawn like live television snow. They moved jerkily, as if frames were missing from a video, and they followed me in my car. I ran through 3 stop signs, leaving Mike's neighborhood behind. The static creatures kept pace during the first blocks, flowing along sidewalks and across front yards. Every street lamp I passed exploded in a shower of sparks. Car alarms began to sound in my wake. After about a mile, they started to fall behind, dissolving into the darkness like bad reception. Now I'm sitting here in my car, in an empty parking lot, trying to make sense of what just happened. My phone is working again, but I can't call Mike yet. What would I say? Sorry, buddy, your TV is possessed by static monsters. Your house is trying to turn people into live TV snow. The dashboard clock says it's just past midnight. The parking lot is empty except for my car, but I still see movement in my peripheral vision, quick flashes of static that vanish when I turn to look at them. The street lamp overhead is flickering, and I swear the pattern looks deliberate, like it's trying to form words. I need to go home, but I'm afraid to start the car again, afraid that the static will return stronger this time, afraid that it's already inside the car's electrical system, waiting to drag me into the signal world where those things came from. I'm afraid that if I look in the rearview mirror again, I'll see a face made of electronic snow staring at me from the back seat. But what scares me the most is the part of me that wants to go back. There's something pulling me, like a magnet drawing iron filings, a voice in the static promising to show me what's on the other side of that electronic snow. All I have to do is look at it, tune in, let go, become signal. The radio in my car just turned on by itself. I need to drive now, anywhere, with no electricity, no screens, no signals of any kind. Maybe the mountains. I'll call Mike when I'm far enough away, try to explain, but right now, I need to put as much distance as possible between me and that house, between me and that static, because even now I can hear it calling me, whispering through every electronic device around me. Join us. Becomes signal. Join us. Becomes signal. And God help me, it's starting to make sense. The plate slipped from my hands and fell into the sink. My fingers froze under the running water. Something was wrong with my kitchen window. A red light was reflecting on the glass from somewhere behind me. I hadn't turned on any red light. I live alone. I grabbed the edge of the sink. My wet hands left dark marks on the stainless steel. The glow wasn't bright, just a dull crimson blotch on the glass, like a brake light reflected in fog, but it was there, floating on the glass, suspended behind my shoulder. I turned around. Nothing. Just my dark kitchen, except for the light above the sink. The microwave clock read 11:42 p.m. The house was silent, except for the water still running. When I looked back at the window, the red glow remained in the reflection, floating in the air about 2 meters off the ground, about where my head would be if someone were standing behind me. My throat went dry. I reached over and turned on the kitchen lights. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed as they came on, flooding the room with harsh white light. The red glow in the window dimmed, but didn't disappear. There must be something outside, I murmured. My voice sounded strange. I stood in the empty kitchen, leaning forward, pressing my hands against the cold glass as I gazed into the night. My backyard was completely shrouded in darkness. No red lights, no car brake lights, nothing that could explain the reflection. Just pure darkness pressing against the window. The water was still running. I turned it off, and in the sudden silence, I could feel the weight of the stillness. My heart thudded against my ribs. The red glow remained exactly where it had been, floating in the window's reflection, about 60 centimeters behind me. I moved away from the sink, and the glow shifted with me, staying fixed in its position in the reflection. My hands began to shake. "Hello?" I called, but there was no answer. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I walked toward the kitchen doorway, watching the reflection all the while. The red glow followed me, always staying the same distance behind my head. When I reached the doorway, I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, my sweaty fingers slipping across the screen as I turned on the flashlight. I swept it around the kitchen, empty. There was no source for the red light. The beam passed through the exact spot where the glow seemed to appear in the reflection, illuminating only the air. My chest tightened. I had to think logically. Maybe it was some kind of strange optical illusion. Maybe something was wrong with my eyes. I blinked hard several times and rubbed my face. The red glow stayed. I returned to the sink, forcing myself to move slowly. The dishes lay forgotten in the soapy water. I reached out and touched the cold glass of the window. It felt icy under my fingertips. In the reflection, the red glow was still floating firmly, now about 20 centimeters to the right of my shoulder. Something made me want to look closer. The color wasn't uniform. It seemed to pulse lightly, like a heartbeat. As I stared, I noticed small dark red specks spinning inside it, like blood cells under a microscope. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. A drop of sweat rolled down my spine. I needed to get out of the kitchen. I backed away from the sink, keeping my eyes fixed on the window. When I reached the doorway, I turned and hurried down the hallway toward the living room. My footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. The living room had a large window that looked out onto the front garden. As soon as I entered the room, I saw it. The red glow was reflected in that window too, floating behind me, just like in the kitchen. "No," I whispered, my voice cracking. "This isn't happening." I spun around in a circle, arms outstretched, trying to catch whatever was causing this. But there was nothing. Just empty air. Yet, in every window, every reflective surface, the red glow followed me, twisting like a distorted shadow. I grabbed my car keys from the coffee table. Maybe if I drove somewhere, anywhere, I could clear my mind. Think clearly. Get help. The front door stuck a little as I opened it, and with a hard push, I stepped outside. The cool night air hit my face as I practically ran toward my car, fumbling with the keys. The motion sensor light in my garage clicked on, casting sharp shadows across the driveway. As I reached the car door handle, I saw my reflection in the window. The red glow was there too, bigger now, maybe the size of a basketball. I moved closer to my head, almost touching my shoulder as it reflected. I dropped my keys, and they skittered across the concrete. As I bent down to pick them up, something made me freeze mid-motion. In the reflection of the car window, I could see the red glow stretching, reaching toward my hunched form like a smoky tentacle. I straightened up, dizzy, my heart pounding hard in my chest. I needed to call someone, the police. But what would I say? That my reflection had a supernatural red light following me? My phone was still in my pocket. I pulled it out with trembling hands, so shaky that I could barely hold it. The screen was dark and reflective, the red glow staring back at me from its surface. I tossed the phone away from me. It rolled across the driveway and came to a stop underneath my car. The motion sensor light turned off, plunging the driveway into darkness, except for the distant yellow glow of a street lamp. My breath came in short gasps. I leaned against the car, trying to calm myself. This couldn't be real. It couldn't. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Go away," I whispered. "Please go away." I opened my eyes. The reflection in the car window now showed the street lamp's glow, and the red light was definitely bigger, definitely closer to my head. I ran down the driveway, past dark houses with dark windows. My feet pounded the concrete, sweat soaking my shirt despite the cool night air. I stopped at the corner. I could see my reflection and the red glow now the size of a beach ball, pressing against the back of my head like a massive drop of blood. I screamed. The sound echoed off the buildings, startling in the quiet night. A dog started barking somewhere nearby. My legs gave way, and I sat down hard on the sidewalk, putting my head between my knees. My whole body shook. I think, I said aloud. I think, what changed today? What did I do differently? I went to work as usual, came home, made dinner, started washing the dishes. Nothing unusual. The dishes were in the sink when I saw it for the first time. Maybe I straightened up, trembling, and started walking back toward my house. Every window I passed showed the same thing, my reflection, and that huge red glow floating behind me. I kept my eyes straight ahead, trying to ignore them. When I reached my front door, I hesitated. The brass doorknob reflected my face, distorted. The red glow had grown so much that it filled the entire curved surface with its pulsing light. I grabbed the knob. I turned it before he could change his mind. The door creaked open, and inside the house, everything was exactly as I had left it. Lights were on in the kitchen, the sink half full of dishes, the keys still scattered in the driveway where I had dropped them. I walked toward the sink, my shoes squeaking slightly on the linoleum. The reflection in the window showed the red glow surrounding my head, as if I were submerged in water, bathed in blood. Moving slowly, I reached the sink. The water had cooled. I found the plate I had been washing when all this started, a simple white plate, with bits of dried food still stuck on it. Something caught my attention, a small mark on the surface of the plate, barely visible under the food residue. I lifted it to the light, and there, engraved into the ceramic, was a symbol I had never seen before. It looked like a spiral with strange angular marks around it. As I stared at it, the marks seemed to shift, making my eyes ache. The plate slipped from my fingers, and this time, when it hit the sink, it shattered. White ceramic shards scattered across the stainless steel, and in the reflection of the window, the red glow pulsed violently. I felt something touch the back of my neck. I spun around abruptly. The kitchen was empty, but now I could feel it, an icy pressure against my skin, exactly where the glow touched my reflection. My legs carried me backward until I hit the counter. The pressure spread across my shoulders, like frozen fingers. The ceiling lights flickered. In that brief moment, I could feel the light of darkness. I heard something, a whisper so faint I almost missed it. Words in a language I didn't understand. The light stabilized, but the pressure increased, pushing down on my shoulders. I grabbed the edge of the counter with such force that my knuckles turned white. The whispers came again, louder this time, as though they were coming from inside my own head. The words slithered through my mind like serpents, leaving trails of ice in their wake. My vision blurred. The red glow in the reflection of the window had grown so bright it hurt to look at, completely surrounding my reflected form, now pulsing to that same rhythm. The cold spread down my arms. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They wanted something. They needed me to understand something. With the last of my strength, I turned my head to look at the broken plate in the sink. The symbol covered my face, catching the light, glowing wetly. As I watched, the strange marks began to move, slowly spinning around the center of the spiral. The whispers reached a fever pitch. The cold spread through my entire body. Now, in the reflection of the window, I saw the red glow begin to seep into my skin, staining it crimson. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The whispers filled my head, drowning out everything else. I understood them now. They were telling me what they needed, what they wanted me to do. My hand moved of its own accord, reaching for one of the broken plate shards. The edge gleamed sharp and white. The last thing I saw in the reflection of the window was my pale, gaunt face as the red glow poured into my eyes like liquid fire. Then, the lights went out. And the whispers told me exactly what to do next. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. They found me unconscious in my kitchen, surrounded by broken plates and covered in old cuts. The doctors couldn't explain the geometric patterns etched into my skin, nor why the wounds faintly glowed red under ultraviolet light. I told them I didn't remember anything. It was easier than trying to explain. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispers again. And when I look in mirrors or windows, I see a faint red glow floating just behind my shoulder, waiting. They're still here, still watching, still hungry. And sometimes, when I'm alone, my hands move on their own, reaching for sharp objects, drawing patterns I don't understand but somehow know by heart. The whispers tell me it won't be long now. Soon, there will be more of us. Soon, everyone will see the red glow in their reflections. I try not to look in mirrors anymore. I try not to see what I'm becoming. But the red glow is always there, waiting in every reflection, and the whispers never stop. They never stop. I shouldn't have checked the doorbell recordings that morning. Some things can't be unseen. Some things change everything you thought you knew about your quiet suburban life. It all started on a Tuesday in October. I was drinking coffee, scrolling through the Ring app when it showed multiple motion alerts from the night before, all between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m. I almost deleted them without watching. Almost. The first clip started off normal enough. The infrared camera showed my front porch empty, in black and white. The wind moved the hanging plant near the door. 15 seconds of nothing. The Ring app was about to swipe to the next one when something moved at the edge of the frame. A figure stepped into view, tall, dressed in dark clothes, walking slowly across my porch, completely silent footsteps on the wooden boards. Their head was down, face hidden by what looked like a hood. My coffee grew cold in my hand as I watched. The figure reached the end of the porch and just stood there, not moving, doing nothing. They just stood there, perfectly still, for almost a minute. Then their heads slowly turned, mechanically, until they were looking directly at the camera. I dropped my phone. The face. God, the face was pale, almost glowing in the infrared light. But somehow, something was wrong. The proportions were off. The eyes were too big, too dark. The mouth stretched too wide. I picked up my phone with trembling hands and forced myself to look at the screen, to keep watching. The figure held that gaze for another 30 seconds before turning and walking out of the frame. The next clip started immediately after. Now they were on the other side of the porch, examining my window, pressing their face against the glass, testing the lock. My stomach churned, remembering that I was asleep just on the other side of that wall. 4 more clips followed the same pattern. The figure would appear, walk around, sometimes look at the camera, sometimes study the windows. The doors always moved with that unnatural slowness, always in complete silence. The final clip showed them standing directly in front of my door, faces just inches from the camera, simply staring. They kept staring for a full 3 minutes. Then, they would slowly retreat, nod their heads slightly, and walk into the darkness. I called into work and reported myself sick. I spent the morning inspecting and reinforcing every lock and window. I installed additional security lights, called a locksmith to add better deadbolts. The whole time, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, a baseball bat across my lap, scrolling through my phone, jumping with every notification. Nothing happened. The porch stayed empty. Around 4 a.m., exhaustion finally took over, and I passed out. The next morning, I immediately checked the recordings. My heart stopped. Between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m., there were 6 new motion alerts. Same figure, same slow, silent walk, same strange face staring directly at my camera. But this time, they tried the door handle repeatedly for almost 5 minutes. I called the police, showed them the recordings. They took a report, said they'd increase patrols in the area and suggested I stay somewhere else for a few nights. But I could tell they weren't taking it seriously. They saw a simple intruder. They hadn't looked into those eyes. I didn't leave. I couldn't leave. Maybe it was some stupid male pride, or maybe just stubbornness, refusing to accept reality. I installed more cameras, bought motion sensors for every entry, even set up a baby monitor in my bedroom to hear any sounds from the porch. The 3rd night, they came again. Same timing, but now they spent the full 15 minutes at my door, turning the knob, pressing against the wood. Their face was never more than a few inches from the camera. I watched it happen live on my phone, frozen in my bed. The doorknob to my bedroom vibrated, the wood creaked, but the locks held. The 4th night, I was ready. I set up in the living room with my bat, a knife, and my phone. I called a friend to come over. Mike was a big guy, ex-military, and he brought his gun. We stayed awake, watching the porch through the window. 3 a.m. and nothing. Then 3:05 a.m., the motion sensor light in the backyard flickered. I turned empty. On the security monitor, 3:10 a.m., a light tap on the kitchen window, so faint I almost missed it. The camera showed nothing. At 3:14 a.m., movement on the front porch. I gripped the bat harder, slowly turned around. They were standing at my window, their face pressed against the glass, staring directly at me, not at the cameras, but at me. I raised the bat and screamed for them to leave. No response. Their lips moved, but no sound came out, yet I could read the words. "Let me in." I stumbled backward, they pressed harder against the glass. The window cracked. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." Their mouths stretched wider with every silent word. Their eyes grew bigger, darker. The window shattered. I ran through the kitchen, out the back door, crossing the yard. Behind me, the glass broke. I made it to my car, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life, and as I put the car in reverse, the headlights swept across my empty porch. I drove to the police station, showed them the car and the recordings. That night's footage was full of static from 3 to 3:15 a.m., even on the cameras inside the house. They found the broken window, filed more reports, dusted for prints, found nothing. I sold the house the next month, moved to the other side of the country, changed my phone number, deleted the Ring app. But sometimes, around 3 a.m., I still check my new security cameras. I keep watching, waiting for movement on my porch. I still see that face in my dreams, pressed against my window. I hear those words whispered. "Let me in." Again and again. And once again, and sometimes in the darkest nights, I swear I see flashes of a tall figure, dressed in dark clothing, standing motionless in my backyard, walking with an unnatural slowness, always with its head turning, staring directly into the camera. The notifications came this morning, 6 motion alerts between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m. I haven't checked them yet. I'm not sure if I will. Some things can be escaped. Some things follow you. Some things just wait, patient and persistent, until you finally crumble and let them in. They're waiting on my porch now. I can feel it. And soon, very soon, I'll have to decide, will I watch those clips? Will I look into those eyes again? Will I listen to the new words whispered through my window? Time is running out. The sun is setting. 3 a.m. is coming for all of us, eventually. I should check those notifications. I shouldn't check those notifications. I have to check those notifications. My finger hovers over the app. The screen glows in the darkness. My hands won't stop shaking. The sound of utensils scraping my empty plate broke the silence in the kitchen at 2 a.m. I hadn't had dinner, and my stomach growled, demanding attention. Sarah, my wife, was away for the weekend visiting her sister, and I had fallen back into my old bachelor habits, eating at odd hours and spending entire nights watching TV without her. The house felt strange, familiar yes, but transformed by the darkness. The shadows cast by the dim light of the microwave gave the rooms an unsettling air. As I made a sandwich, turkey, lettuce, tomato, mustard, mayonnaise, I thought about how silent the house was. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floor broke the stillness. When I cut the sandwich diagonally, as Sarah always insisted, I heard a sound that froze my blood, a distinct step from the stairs leading to the second floor. Another step followed, slow and deliberate, echoing on the wood. "Max?" I called, assuming it was our golden retriever coming down to see if there was food for him. Another step. Max appeared behind me, nudging his snout against my calf. I turned, relieved, and there he was, wagging his tail, his eyes gleaming with hunger for the bite I was holding. Then the steps stopped. I glanced toward the hallway leading to the stairs. Empty. My heart raced. "Max?" I whispered, seeking comfort in his presence. But the dog, too, was staring down the hallway, his fur bristling, a low growl beginning in his throat. His behavior was off. Max was the friendliest dog you could imagine. Something was wrong. I tried to stay calm, grabbing a knife from the countertop. My phone was upstairs in the bedroom. I cursed silently. The only phone downstairs was in the living room, across the hallway. Max kept growling, his eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the kitchen light. "I'm armed!" I shouted into the hallway, hoping any intruder would give up. There was no response. Max moved closer to me, his growl intensifying. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the hallway. The kitchen light cast long shadows that danced on the walls. I walked slowly, the knife extended in front of me. Max, usually brave, stayed behind me, but his eyes never stopped watching the stairs. I turned on the hallway light, and the area was illuminated. Nothing. I looked up at the stairs. Everything seemed normal. The hallway carpet, the one Sarah had chosen, was in place, undisturbed. Yet a creak from the second floor made me jump. I looked up where the hallway light didn't reach. Something was moving in the room Sarah and I had planned to turn into a nursery before we found out we couldn't have children. I backed toward the kitchen. Max was pressed against my legs. My hand searched for the car keys on the counter, and I accidentally knocked them over, causing them to fall to the ground with a deafening crash that echoed through the silence of the house. The footsteps upstairs stopped instantly. With swift movements, I grabbed the keys, yanked Max by his collar, and slammed open the back door. We rushed outside toward the car, the cool night air slightly calming my terror. Max jumped into the seat as I started the engine, my hand trembling as I turned the key. I drove onto the street, the tires screeching. Through the rearview mirror, I glanced back at the house. The kitchen and hallway lights were still on. Then, in one of the second-floor windows, I thought I saw something, a shadow that vanished so quickly I wasn't sure I had even seen it. I drove for 20 minutes before pulling into a 24-hour open lot. The fluorescent lights of the parking lot cast everything in a cold, artificial glow. Max, though calmer, was still alert, his ears swiveling toward every sound. I pulled out my old emergency phone from the glove compartment and dialed Sarah's number. It took a while for her to answer, and when she did, her voice was thick with sleep. "Hello, Sarah, please come home. Something's wrong." "John, what's going on?" she asked, alarmed. I tried to explain, but my words stumbled over each other. Finally, I managed to get the basics out. I'd heard footsteps. Max had reacted, and something was in the house. "Did you call the police?" she asked. "No, not yet. I wanted to hear from you first." Sarah sighed on the other end of the line. "Call them, John. I'm coming home as fast as I can." I did what she asked. 20 minutes later, I arrived back at the house to find 2 patrol cars parked at the entrance. 4 officers had already searched the house and found nothing. Officer Chin, who seemed to be in charge, tried to calm me down. "It's all safe, Mr. Thompson. It was probably the open windows that caused the noise." I didn't argue. Max and I stayed in the car until Sarah arrived. Her face was etched with worry. We went inside together, checking every corner, every closet. Everything seemed fine, but that night, while Sarah slept soundly, I stayed awake, listening. I didn't hear any more footsteps that night, but something told me this wasn't over. 3 weeks later, I installed security cameras all around the house. Sarah didn't complain, although I noticed her exchanging worried glances with her sister whenever she came to visit. Every night, I reviewed the footage, searching for any sign of what I had heard and felt that night. For those weeks, everything was quiet. But sometimes, when I was alone, I'd sense movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow shifting just beyond my vision. Max noticed it too. From time to time, he'd stare at an empty corner, his ears pricked, his body tense. The cameras never picked up anything, but one night, while I was reviewing the footage, I saw something. It only lasted for an instant, a shadow that shouldn't have been there, crossing quickly in front of one of the hallway cameras. I didn't tell Sarah, but since then, I've avoided going upstairs at night. I keep the cameras running, and every night before I go to bed, I check all the doors. I know that it doesn't matter what was in that house that night. It didn't need doors or windows. I was already inside. The clock on my phone read 3:17 a.m. when the portrait moved. I know this because I checked the time right after waking up with a start, my heart pounding hard against my ribs. The old woman in the black dress was staring directly at me from her golden frame, her head tilted at an impossible angle that shouldn't have existed. When I went to bed, I had chosen room 412 at the Blackwood Hotel specifically for its historical charm. The receptionist had mentioned it was one of their heritage rooms, preserved to look exactly as it did in 1922 when the hotel first opened. The dark wood furniture, the brass fixtures, and the vintage photographs adorning the walls all piqued my interest in the history of the place. But now, lying on the old 4-poster bed with sweat beading on my forehead, that charm felt more like a trap. I noticed something strange about the portrait while I was unpacking that same night. The woman in the painting seemed to be about 60 years old, wearing a high-necked black dress typical of the Victorian era. Her gray hair was severely pulled back, and her thin lips were pressed into a strict line. But it was her eyes that really caught my attention, dark brown and unnaturally piercing. As I moved around the room, those eyes seemed to follow me. I told myself it was just a common optical illusion. Portraits always seem to follow viewers with their gaze. It's all about perspective and how the artist painted them. I had noticed the same effect in museums many times. Even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was different, more deliberate, more aware. At first, I tried to ignore it. I hung my clothes in the old wardrobe, arranged my toiletries in the bathroom, and answered some work emails on my laptop. But every time I looked up, those eyes were fixed on me. I even did an experiment, walking slowly from one side of the room to the other while staring at the portrait. The woman's gaze perfectly followed my every move. My neck muscles tightened. I approached the portrait to examine it, fighting the urge to look away from those intense eyes. The small brass plaque beneath the frame read, Margaret Blackwood 1849 to 1922, the original owner of the hotel. I assumed her face had been painted with remarkable detail. I could see individual strands of gray hair escaping from her tight bun and small crow's feet at the corners of her eyes. The artist had captured an unsettling intensity in her expression, as if she were judging everyone who dared to enter her domain. I reached out to adjust the frame, which hung slightly crooked. The moment my fingers touched the metal, a sharp, cold sensation shot through my hand. I jerked back suddenly, stumbling away from the wall. The cold lingered in my fingertips for several minutes. Despite my unease, the exhaustion of a long day's travel finally won over. I prepared to sleep, deliberately turning my back to the portrait as I changed into my pajamas. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable for its age, and the sheets smelled fresh and clean. I turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the city filtering through the heavy curtains. I woke to a sound first, a soft scraping noise, like metal dragging across plaster. Then came the creak of old wood under strain. My eyes shot open, but I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. In the dim light, I could see that the portrait had shifted. The frame was now tilted at a sharp angle, and Margaret Blackwood's face was completely turned toward my bed. Her eyes shone with an impossible brightness in the dark. I froze, my muscles stiff with fear. My throat felt too tight to scream. The only sound was my heartbeat pounding in my ears, and the soft ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. The portrait hadn't just moved, it had rotated on the wall. The bottom edge was still firmly against the plaster, while the top leaned at an angle that defied gravity. A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the room. In that brief illumination, I swear I saw Margaret Blackwood's lips curl into a smile, an impossible smile. My body finally responded to the frantic signals from my brain. I leaped out of bed, stumbling as my feet got tangled in the sheets. I crashed into the wall before finding the light switch. A warm light flooded the room, and I turned to face the portrait. It hung perfectly straight, exactly as it had when I first arrived. I stood there, panting, the carpet rough under my bare feet. Sweat soaked through my shirt. My hands kept trembling, and I forced myself to walk closer to the portrait, battling against every instinct that screamed for me to run. Margaret Blackwood stared ahead, her expression as stern and unyielding as the painted oils should be. I touched the frame again, ignoring the cold bite of the metal, which was firmly mounted on the wall with heavy hooks. There was no way it could have moved on its own. It was just a nightmare, I told myself. Stress and an unfamiliar bed were playing tricks on my mind. The bedside clock read 3:22 a.m. I had an important meeting at 9, and desperately needed sleep. But the thought of turning off the lights again made my stomach twist. What if the portrait moved in the night? After all, with the high season for tourism, all the other rooms were likely booked. A sound, like nails scraping against wood, made me spin around. Nothing had changed, but the portrait seemed to loom even more than before, pulling my eyes against my will. Margaret Blackwood's gaze pierced through me, heavy and palpable. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. That decided it. I grabbed my phone and wallet, slipped on my shoes, and abruptly opened the door. If I had to, I would sleep in the lobby. The hallway was empty, lit by dim wall sconces that cast more shadows than light. The red carpet muffled my steps as I hurried toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard the soft click of a door closing, but when I glanced back, the door to room 412 had not moved. The elevator dinged, and I almost threw myself inside, repeatedly pressing the lobby button until the doors finally closed. Just as the doors were closing, I saw something dark move in the hallway. My heart raced, and I pressed myself against the back wall of the elevator. The lobby was empty, except for a young man behind the reception desk, absorbed in his phone, looking bored. He looked up as I approached, raising an eyebrow at my disheveled appearance. "Everything okay, sir?" he asked. I opened my mouth to explain, then stopped. How could I describe what I had experienced without sounding insane? I ran my hands over my face, buying time to think. I'm having some issues with my room," I said finally. "Room 412. Is there any chance I could switch to another one?" The receptionist's expression subtly shifted. "Is there a specific problem with the room?" "The portrait. The one of Margaret Blackwood." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Has any other guest complained about it?" He was silent for a long moment, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "The portrait of Mrs. Blackwood is a valuable piece of the hotel's history," he said carefully. "Some guests have mentioned feeling uncomfortable with it, but I assure you, there's nothing to worry about." "It moved!" I exclaimed. "Yes, that's a common observation," he said, as though it was nothing unusual. "It's just the style of the painting, sir. A perspective trick." "No. You don't understand. It physically moved on the wall. I was asleep." I raised my hand to stop myself. "Sir, I apologize, but we are fully booked tonight. I can't move you to another room. However, if you'd like, I can have maintenance check the mounting of the portrait in the morning to ensure it's secure." My shoulders slumped. I could tell by his expression that pressing the matter further would get me nowhere. "That's fine, thank you anyway," I said, turning toward the elevator. Then I stopped. The thought of going back there made my skin crawl. "Actually, is it okay if I sit here for a while?" I asked. "I'm having trouble sleeping." "Of course, sir. Would you like some coffee?" he asked. I nodded gratefully and sank into one of the comfy chairs in the lobby. The receptionist brought me a decent cup of coffee, and I spent the next hour trying to get some rest, trying to convince myself I had imagined everything. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret Blackwood's face turning toward my bed, her painted lips curling into that impossible smile. Around 4:30 a.m., exhaustion finally won over fear. I couldn't spend the rest of the night in the lobby. I needed to at least grab my laptop. And the change of clothes for tomorrow's meeting. Maybe I could find a different hotel with available rooms. The elevator ride back felt longer than before. The hallway was silent and empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My hands trembled as I slid the access card into the door of room 412. Everything seemed normal inside. The portrait hung straight on the wall, the eyes of Margaret Blackwood staring ahead. I grabbed my laptop bag and began packing clothes into my suitcase, keeping my back turned to the painting. A floorboard behind me creaked. I froze, clutching a handful of shirts to my chest. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. Slowly, very slowly, I turned. The portrait had vanished. Only an empty frame hung on the wall, the canvas completely blank except for a dark background. Before I could process what I was seeing, a movement caught my eye. A figure stood in the corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows. She wore a high-necked black dress, her gray hair tightly pulled back. Her skin had the color of old paper, and her eyes, those terrible, predatory eyes, were locked onto me with an unsettling focus. Margaret Blackwood stepped forward. Her movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. I ran. I don't remember dropping my clothes or opening the door. One moment, I was staring at the horror in the corner. The next, I was racing down the hallway toward the stairs. I couldn't wait for the elevator. I couldn't risk being trapped in that small space. Behind me, I heard the click of shoes on the carpet, moving slowly, deliberately. I hit the stairs, pushed open the door to the stairwell, and took the steps 3 at a time, my feet barely touching each landing before leaping to the next step. I burst into the lobby at full speed, startling the receptionist so much that he dropped his phone. I didn't stop to explain. I ran straight toward the front doors, into the pre-dawn darkness, and didn't slow down until I was 2 blocks away. When I finally stopped, breathless, with a sharp pain in my side, I realized I had left everything behind: my suitcase, laptop, wallet, even my shoes. All I had were my phone and the clothes I had slept in. I called my boss and made up a story about food poisoning to explain my absence from the meeting. Then, I found a 24-hour diner and sat there, drinking coffee until my hands stopped shaking. When the sun rose, I called a colleague and borrowed enough money for a taxi to the airport. I bought a ticket for the next flight home, not caring about the cost. Later that day, I called the hotel to have them send my belongings. The receptionist who answered didn't seem surprised by my request. He assured me they would send everything to my home address. A week later, a package arrived with my suitcase and laptop. Everything was there, except my wallet. They claimed they had never found it. I didn't care. I had already canceled all my cards. In the side pocket of my suitcase, there was a small piece of paper I didn't recognize. It looked old, the edges yellowed and crumbling. Written in faded ink, there was a single phrase: "Thank you for visiting the Blackwood Hotel. We hope you'll join us again soon." The handwriting was elaborate and feminine, the kind taught in Victorian finishing schools. Below the message, there was a signature: Margaret Blackwood. I burned the note and blocked the hotel's number on my phone. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream of those eyes watching me from the darkness. And sometimes, when I pass by mirrors or framed pictures, I catch myself checking to make sure nothing has moved within them. I've never stayed in another historic hotel. Modern chains may lack character, but at least their walls are empty of watching eyes. And if I ever find myself in that city again, I'll sleep in my car before stepping foot in the Blackwood Hotel. The worst part isn't the nightmares or the lingering fear of the portraits. It's knowing that somewhere, in room 412, Margaret Blackwood's painting still hangs on the wall, waiting for the next guest to appreciate its history and charm. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she ever truly returned to her frame. I shouldn't have agreed to house sit for Mike. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit in my car outside his house, the engine running, my hands shaking on the wheel. My throat is raw from shouting, and my shirt is soaked with sweat. I need to tell someone what happened there, even if they don't believe me.